Then it happened. A resounding thwack echoed in the room. Like a blur, Kyle's slap, brutal and disgustingly powerful, sent the fixer swaying unconsciously and staggering sideways. As Vance forcefully steadied himself with a bite to his tongue, his tactical knife at the ready as he pressed forward to attack again, all that he remembered before being knocked out was the circular build of a frying pan, slamming right into his temple. And as Kyle watched the fixer's figure get knocked out, he let out a curious expression as he stared at the makeshift weapon in his right hand. Prior to this moment, Oliver, whom he had sent an SOS text just in case things went south between he and Vance, arrived at the scene. And alongside Jeff, Owen, and Xavier, they had all witnessed the moment Kyle whipped up the frying pan at an alarming speed and whacked it right into Adam's temple in double-quick time. Noticing them, the young star, with a genuinely curious expression on his features, turned around and stated aloud, "Frying pans. Trusty ol' little thing, am I right?" Having rounded up filming for the day, the rest of Kyle's team, alongside Cass, Sharon, Lily, and Clint, took to visiting Kyle's office, not at the studio, as he had requested for them via text. In said text, he had also highlighted how he had apprehended Adam, whom had been up to no good on set, and how he'd purposely decided to stay quiet to ensure filming went smoothly on set. So, when the fixer had woken up a few hours later in the nice-looking office, complete with various eyes of disdain angled in his direction, he pretty much knew he was doubly screwed. And so, repeating his words again, Kyle had asked of the fixer if he was willing to cooperate this time, or if he preferred rotting in a prison for the rest of his life. Without resistance, Vance fully agreed to the choice that was of the most benefit to him, and that was how Kyle got so much dirt on Lex than he could admit he'd know what to do with. But first and foremost, he needed to send a warning, one that would essentially shake the very foundations of he and Lex's interactions. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. A few days later, Lex had arrived back in L.A. after an extended business meeting that ran for a fair few days. And like the busy man he was, he had gotten straight to attending to his other business matters, specifically those that involved Fables and Legends post-production. Unsurprisingly, he'd heard that Martin Ronan hadn't been too happy with what they'd done after he'd watched an unrated cut of the movie, but Lex couldn't care less honestly. They were, after all, planning to milk Fables and Legend as a 7-part franchise. In any case, as the CEO kept sorting through the many documents which had piled up in his brief absence, Donna soon walked into the office to hand him a letter that she classified as urgent. And so, casually receiving the letter, glazing over the sender's details, Lex's eyes creased in victory, a smug smile curling on his lips. But after unfurling the message in the envelope, which had a flash drive encased within, his smile faltered when he read the singular large text that greeted him. "Lawyer up, douchebag. You're gonna need it." Swiftly, he plugged the flash drive into his laptop, and the moment its contents were shown, the CEO of the industry juggernaut still maintained an outwardly impassive expression, only to quietly suck in a sharp breath, a cold sweat breaking on his forehead as he thought to himself, "Fuck." Chapter 245, How the Turntables Have. It had been a week since the crew had finished up filming for Tech Wiz Year 1, and now, the movie was fully in post-production. Xavier and Cass, being the competent power couple and director-producer duo that they were, never for once slacked off during this process as they were heavily involved in the film's editing process. The CGI scenes especially were ones the director wanted no compromises on, and with his jack-of-all-trades skill that Kyle had long figured out were tailor-made for moments like this, made every input he gave during every stage of the pre-production invaluable. Added to that, Productions, Hank and Bruce especially, were just as involved in the entire process as they were in talks with booking down a robust lineup of distribution deals for the movie, enough that it would land in cinemas on the same day, both domestically and overseas. Yet the most curious thing that had happened so far during all these was the sudden shift in tone Atlas International had taken towards Spawn Point Studio. If previously, they had been a relentless nuisance that had gone suspiciously quiet for months, they were now making a dramatic 180 as they actively tried to cozy up to Spawn Point Studio under the guise of investors in the film. As a result, Kyle's phone buzzed for the umpteenth time today. Retrieving the device from his pocket, The young man glanced over to the caller's details. Seeing that it was a private number, he casually picked up. "Good day, Mr. Kestis. This is Donna Ellsworth from Atla." Colin passively cut the call. He wasn't interested in speaking to Lex's secretary. Pocketing the device, the young star returned his attention to the studio before him with a contented sigh, a messenger bag slung over his other arm. It had been quite a while since he'd been here, and if he was being honest, he'd really missed its environment. Atlas again? Jenny, whom had walked up the staircase to open the door to the recording studio, turned around to ask as the door opened with a soft click. Kyle hummed in response, the smile on his lips only getting wider as he kept staring at the studio. Not Lex. Oliver, whom was standing on his other side, despite knowing, rhetorically asked, one hand tucked into his pockets as the other held onto the handle of his laptop bag. He was practically gloating at the moment. Not Lex. Kyle chuckled in response as he took his first step up the stairs. In response, the agent, enjoying every bit of this turnaround of events, trailed behind his ward as he remarked thoughtfully. Must be holding onto his pride. I'm sure he is, Kyle replied as he stepped through the doors. Seeing Jenny already seated by the soundboard, the recording studio spick and span, Kyle once again let out a contented sigh. Making music. It was such an integral part of his life that having been on an on-and-off relationship with it these past few months had him feeling noticeably pumped up to be back in the kind of professional environment that facilitated it. In any case, Kyle and Jenny actually had a lot of work to sort out today. The movie's scores and soundtrack, often substituted and interchangeably used for the other. A movie score usually involved crafting original music tailored precisely for the movie to amplify and enrich its storytelling, while the soundtrack typically incorporated existing songs or licensed music into the movie to do the same. That said, granted, most of the soundtracks had already been handled by the movie's other composers, which were also on their way to the studio. Kyle didn't want to be the one holding them back. And so, no sooner had he settled into his seat, he pulled out his laptop and a backup flash drive, showing the scores he had been working on to Jenny. The audio engineer, on the other hand, upon listening to each individual score over the course of a few minutes with her trained ear, had various spikes of tingly chills run up her spine. Sure, all the scores still needed a lot of refining, but even then, Jenny couldn't help but inwardly remark as she stared at an unaware Kyle with an almost dumbfounded gaze. How'd he even come up with all this amidst his hectic filming schedule? Kyle, on the other hand, upon noticing her expression, took the liberty to explain. Well, I did spend the last few weeks of filming cooped up in my office at the studio. Best believe I also got in some much-needed composing on my end. You're beyond me, Kyle. And I mean that at the most respectful, awe-inspiring way possible. Jenny let out a genuinely impressed sigh as she switched on the board. This earned a genuinely appreciative smile from the young man. After all, just because he heard the scores in Deep Dive doesn't mean it was easy replicating them as some, especially the ones in the Dive of Faith and Run Nathan. Run scene really put him through his paces. Added to that, the scores were only presented in the scenes themselves, so the remaining parts of the uncompleted score was something he himself had needed to sort out on his own. That said, no sooner were they done with their initial interactions regarding the unrefined scores, the duo got to work as Oliver also pulled out his own laptop and got down to business. Throughout the entire process, both talent and agent had their phones ring at several intervals, all of it from Atlas's employees as expected. But whenever they picked it, and it wasn't Lex himself, they'd simply cut it and move on with whatever it was they were doing. And about a few hours later, Owen soon walked into the studio with the movie's other composers, each and every one of them exchanging warm pleasantries with Kyle, Jenny, and Oliver. Amidst this, Owen casually moved over to Kyle and reminded him, "Kyle, I figured I should remind you that the studio's having a press conference for the game's DLC release in November tomorrow. Thought you might want to attend." "Oh," Kyle muttered audibly, his expression thoughtful as he mused. "I did delegate that job to Sharon in my place, 'cause I predicted I'd be busy sorting out the movie's score as at the moment, but considering he only needed to refine and elevate the already completed scores, the young star came to a different decision. All right, thanks for the reminder, Owen. I'll be attending the event." He gently patted his assistant on the shoulder in appreciation. ****. Ever since the Hollywood strike, Summit Talent Agency, STA, Sharon's previous agency, had only spiraled deeper into one problem after the other. Sure, they had been doing a good job, albeit wishy-washy, at agreeing with their actors' demands after their uprising, but something else, something unexpected, began to tumble that unstable brick. Sharon Winters, having seen her suddenly quit working with STA, only to hear that she was going to be starring as the female lead in Tech Whiz. Year 1. A lot of actors in the agency felt something fishy must have gone down between her and the agency. After all, it didn't make any sense for STA to lose out on the chance to be involved in a movie that had one of the biggest hypes surrounding it since its announcement earlier in the year. One that was unveiled at the Super Bowl, no less. As a result, a fair few of them had banded together to begin investigating what had led to such a fallout, solely out of pure curiosity. And what they had stumbled upon really had them reevaluating their affiliation with the company. Sharon's contract with STA was nothing short of a nightmare, to put it simply, one that bordered solely on exploitation. For starters, the contracts imposed excessive exclusivity clauses, prevented her from accepting roles outside of STA's negotiated deals, regardless of how lucrative or career-defining they might have been. This meant that even if a major studio wanted her for a role, the lady couldn't negotiate on her own terms as STA had full control over her opportunities. This was also why Sharon, despite being so talented, had been purposely prevented by STA from becoming an A-lister to keep her groveling beneath and sucking up to them. Then came the unfair revenue splits. While industry standards ensured actors took home a fair share of their earnings, Sharon's contract allowed STA to take an abnormally large percentage of her profits, including those from endorsements and even social media sponsorships. Essentially, STA wasn't just profiting from the lady's acting work, they were also cashing in on every facet of her personal brand. Additionally, Sharon's creative freedom was non-existent. STA had final say on her public appearances, interviews, and even the kinds of roles she could accept. In fact, if they deemed a project not aligned with their agenda, she had no choice but to reject it, regardless of how much she wanted to take it on. Perhaps the worst revelation of all to the curious actors, however, had been the buyout penalty. If Sharon wanted to leave the agency before her contract expired, she would have to pay a staggering, borderline impossible exit fee designed to keep her shackled to STA indefinitely. This exactly was why, when the lady was about to leave, she had practically returned every blessed thing she had ever owned, all of it equating to the bogus fee she would have to pay in collateral. That said, when these fair few curious actors at STA had fully uncovered and shared the details of Sharon's contract with other lesser-grade actors, it wasn't just shocking, it was downright terrifying. As a result, many of them soon came to the realization that they, too, could be caught in a similarly exploitative deal, making them seriously reconsider their association with the agency. It didn't take long before the talent agency experienced the cascade of effects that followed, especially Sharon's former agent, Bianca, whose talents began dropping her like a bad habit. And now, with most of their B-listers also quitting, they were getting extremely desperate to retain them. But for a bitter Bianca, she couldn't help but seethe with anger and resentment whenever she thought back to the fact that Sharon Winters had, in fact, indirectly accelerated the company's misfortune. This was why, today, instead of attending a company meeting on what they could do to keep their actors around before the media got a whiff of what was going on, signed NDA clauses in their contracts or not, the sour agent had taken to attend Tech Whiz's DLC press conference in Canada. Her goal? Putting Sharon in a very delicate spot with a potentially controversial question. Chapter 246 in Clutch. Where's Kyle? Sharon, dressed neatly for the occasion, inquired curiously, the press conference on the eve of commencing. In his office, Dahlia casually replied as they all descended down the stairs to meet with the group of gamers, journalists, and reporters whom were giddily waiting for the event to start. Apparently, he had an important conference call to pick, so he asked of us to begin without him. Carlos chipped in, hands tucked into his pockets as he descended the staircase last. All right then. Sharon gave a small nod in appreciation of their responses. And then, with her eyes closed briefly, the lady opened them as she put on her most dazzling smile while stating, "Showtime." Asterisk. Meanwhile, Kyle, having just rounded up his conference video call with Cass, Hank and Bruce regarding the movie's pre-production and planned promos in the coming months, gave his farewells. Yeah, need to attend the press conference now. Talk to you guys later. The movie was targeting a late holiday release, an unannounced 20th of December to be exact, and so was Fables and Legends, unfortunately. From the onset, Kyle had definitely figured out that this would happen, although he wasn't too perturbed by it. With the transmission ended though, phone tucked in his pockets, Kyle proceeded to exit his office, only to feel his phone buzz again. Already expecting another private number call from one of Atlas's employees, Kyle's brows arched in unexpected amusement when he saw his phone's identifier app bring forth the actual name of the caller this time. Lex Alexander Harlow. So, with a light chuckle almost escaping his lips, the young star instead reeled in his amusement. Swiping the receive button, Kyle picked up the call. "Good day, Kestis." Lex speaking. The smooth voice from the other end carried an informally strong hint of disrespect to it. "Hello, Harlow. Fancy hearing that annoying voice of yours. Wake up on the wrong side of the bed." Kyle poked right back, his tone even more disrespectful despite the innocent smile on his current features. Asterisk. The press conference for the Tech Wiz DLC release had initially been planned as a straightforward showcase. A small tour of Spawn Point Studio, an hour of gameplay, and a brief Q&A session with gamers, gaming journalists and reporters, all in response to fan requests on various social media platforms. After all, with the immense success of the base game, the curiosity as to how the studio had come to be and who its employees were, especially with Kyle's fame, had been of genuine interest to a lot of fans. However, with all the recent rumors swirling that TechWiz Year 1 had officially wrapped up filming and would be releasing in late December, the anticipation for the event had skyrocketed, turning it into a fairly major spectacle. Even at the moment, as the event included over a 75K plus people watching live on YouTube, a few more netizens were still streaming into the session at a moderate pace, their comments every bit as expected. Artis_world. Man, ain't this studio quite small in comparison to all them big AAA studios? How in incarnation were they able to achieve such refined levels of gameplay with their limited resources? American_dragon. Okay, that basement tour was sick. Noob dev. I had no idea there was something called the volume technology, but if that's where they filmed the CGI scenes of the movie like it's rumored, then I expect to see some amazing action scenes in the movie. Wizlord. Finally, the showcase. I've been patiently waiting for this. If they have an hour plus of gameplay to show, it just means they're that confident in what they've crafted. Currently seated in their mini lobby on the first floor where the massive 146-inch OLED TV screen was, were gamers and journalists in equal measure, all of whom had been lucky enough to be accepted through an application system prior to the press release. As more gameplay footage for the DLC was shown, with the addition of 2 completely brand new maps added in-game in the form of fictional renditions of Queens and Brooklyn, the audience in the room could only watch in genuine intrigue and excitement as Carlos, and surprisingly, Sharon, played in co-op through a set-piece moment. The livestream comments, too, did a good job of reflecting just how hyped the gamers, both in the room and online, were. Wizlord. You know, Spawn Point Studios could have opted to make this DLC, TechWiz 2, for a full price, and I'd still buy it because damn, these guys cooked. Bubble Tea Lover. That gamer journalist in front is literally me. Dude's so excited his legs won't sit still. Indie_lover. What still really baffles me is how they optimized a game as complex as this across a range of hardware, especially those on the lower ends of the spectrum. Do they have an in-house game engine? Chisenet. Nobody told me Sharon could game. I thought she was just here for the movie's promotions since she voices Voltress and plays Felicia in the live action. Speaking of promotions though, where's Kyle? As the DLC's showcase continued, an hour swiftly passed by, and before everyone knew it, that actual press conference moment of the showcase had arrived. The Q&A session. Seated around the semicircular couch in the very same lobby was Carlos, the studio head, Dahlia, the lead animator, Chase, the lead software engineer and programmer, Ariana, the lead narrative designer, Sasha, the project manager, and Sharon herself, the performance capture of Voltress, the main antagonist in the DLC. Save for Sharon, They had all been the ones to attend Gamescom initially with Kyle, Oliver, and Owen. In any case, currently behind them was the poster of the game, and before them was a similarly curved desk, populated with gamepads, table mics, and refreshments. As journalists and reporters clicked pictures at frequent intervals, the occasional questions flying about here and there, one of the gamers soon directed her question to the studio head, her voice peppy. How long in production has the DLC been? I mean, if we're being honest, you could practically market it as a part 2 and everyone would probably agree. Chuckling a bit in response to that question, same as majority in the room, Carlos let out a light smile as he responded. Roughly a year and a few months, give or take. The reason why the DLC's so stacked is because there was so much we wanted to fit into the base game, but couldn't. So, in an effort to not waste those resources, we figured we could just make it into its own thing and polish it to create another complete experience. He concluded with a gesture towards the lady, hoping that answered her question. With a curt nod from her, other questions soon piled up, most directed to any of the game devs willing to answer. Does this DLC lay the groundwork for a possible Tech Wiz 2? Or is this purely an extension of the current story? Are there any plans for additional side missions, challenges, or post-DLC content updates? What were some of the biggest challenges you guys faced while developing the DLC? With the upcoming live-action adaptation, has there been any sort of, creative synergy between the game studio and the film production team? With each question getting answered to the best of their ability, still with Kyle nowhere to be found, both the audience in the room and the live streamers simply assumed the young CEO was probably busy with the live-action adaptation's post-production and promos. As all this was happening, though, a masked Bianca quietly sat among the gaming journalists, her presence blending in and unnoticed. While others kept eagerly asking about the game mechanics and other technical details, the embittered agent was carefully biding her time with her own agenda. Sharon, can you share any fun or interesting behind-the-scenes details about your performance capture as Voltress? We wouldn't mind spoilers for the live-action adaptation too, a male reporter asked, grinning at the lady as he inquired. You cheeky little thing, the actress gave the reporter an amused smile, prompting the entire room to chuckle loudly as she proceeded to give a proper answer. And so, the moment the atmosphere in the room was at an all-time high, just after Sharon had responded to that very last question, Bianca promptly seized her moment. With a meticulously feigned air of professionalism, she raised her hand, and luckily, or unluckily, she was called upon. Subtly licking her lips, her voice laced with an almost smug curiosity, she dropped the bomb. Sharon, given today's emphasis on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in Hollywood, do you believe the upcoming Tech Wiz live-action adaptation is doing enough to meet those standards? The question, at least with the way it was presented, seemed innocent. But it was also undeniably and completely irrelevant to the gaming-focused event. Yet, it immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room as journalists exchanged glances, some raising their brows in confusion, others quickly jotting away and whipping out their notes as they sensed a potential controversy. Shark doo-doo, CJ, shit. Here we go again. Politics hater, for the love of all things good, why can't these darned, crazy-ass reporters just not bring darn politics into every darn thing? Despite this shift in ambience, Bianca trained her laser-focused gaze on Sharon, who similarly squinted her eyes in the masked reporter's direction, a hint of disdainful familiarity in her ocean blue irises. As the atmosphere got heavier, with most journalists and reporters watching, waiting, hoping for even the slightest misstep in the lady's response that could fuel the headlines, a door clicked open. And walking out of his office, a light smile on his features, was the CEO, who casually spoke as he pocketed his smartphone. Well, that's not a question about the game. His noticeably tense employees became instantly relieved at his arrival, and so was Sharon. The livestream comments, on the other hand, well, it exploded in a stream of comments. We do a bit of trolling him. Him has arrived. Was Lord Kyle walking into the building like he's Mary Poppins, y'all. Gamer girl next door. Hi K.K. Oh wait, he can't hear me. Fudge. Politics hater. Take that masked reporter. Excuse me. Bianca feigned innocence as Kyle walked over to seat amidst his employees, his smile as steady as ever as he affirmed, "I said, that isn't a question about the game. But what sort of press conference is this?" The young CEO cut the lady off with a gentle smile, his question simple yet polite. "A gaming press conference," Bianca, through gritted teeth, responded. "Exactly. Any questions you might want to ask, DI-related or not, please make it gaming-focused." Kyle maintained his composure as he kept speaking, his soft smile never faltering. He was tethering on the edge of a touchy subject here, but the young man didn't look the least bit perturbed. "Also, just to clarify, we here at Spawn Point Studio prefer to keep politics separate from fiction. That's an ironclad rule here." The CEO returned his attention to the audience in the room, an element of eloquence to his tone as he continued calmly. "Now, I may not be 100% right on the statement I'm about to make, but I'm fairly certain fun and escapism is what most gamers want. Why then would we want to impede on that wish of theirs with our beliefs? That would be extremely insensitive of us, no? So, as long as gamers prefer that sense of fun, escapism, and most of all, romanticism over reality, then that's what we'll keep giving them." Kyle gestured to the audience in the room, after which he then angled his gaze back to Sharon as he playfully inquired, "I hope you didn't mind me stealing your thunder." "What do you mean, steal your thunder?" "As you can see, I'm clearly enjoying hearing you speak, so please, be my guest," the lady replied with a gesture of her hands, her tone full of mirth. What followed next was a wave of hearty chuckles in the room that dispelled the previously tense atmosphere, the live streamers similarly joining in with their own comments. "Whiz Lord, this, ladies and gents, is why I love this man." Even though he had every right to bash that reporter for asking such an insensitive question, bro handled it with class. "Slick like me, smoothest save I've ever witnessed on this topic being brought up. King Kong, Kyle's a whole different breed, man. How did he even manage to talk so long on such a touchy subject without pissing off anyone? Mad respect. We do a bit of trolling, see? I told you guys Kyle's him." And just like that, the live stream session went on, Bianca and any other controversy-seeking journalist or reporter unable to do as they would have pleased due to Kyle's full-circle response essentially keeping them from trying anything funny. Due to this, the rest of the press conference was smooth sailing from there, not a single controversial issue arising till it was over. As for Kyle, no sooner had he left the studio for the day, he couldn't help but whistle happily as he made his way to his vehicle. Just before he had joined in on the conference, the certain CEO whom had called had formally requested for an audience with him, and in the next 2 days, both parties would be meeting up to sign an NDA agreement that was heavily skewed in the young man's favor. That said, Kyle's phone buzzed again. Only this time, he was extremely curious yet concerned when he saw that it was a video call from Christina, and therein lay the issue as the lady, for obvious reasons, preferred texting over calling unless it was really important or urgent. Chapter 247, A Good Man. It's suddenly gotten a bit rowdy over there. "Oh, my bad. Just stepped into a mall. Give me a minute, Jeff. I'll find somewhere quiet." "No problem, kiddo. Take your time," Jeff replied, his tone accommodating despite having initiated the call. A few seconds later, having found a slightly secluded area in the mall, Kyle continued his conversation with his Hollywood Gramps as he gave the details of he and Lex's discussion. "So, I figured that was the best move. That way, everyone's covered." Sporting a thin smile on his lips as he listened to him speak from the other end of the line, Jeff then spoke, his tone understanding. Kid, I had a feeling you'd take that route. I'll admit, it's a smart move, one I perfectly understand, but some part of me really wishes you stuck it to him." Jeff added with a light sigh as he awaited Kyle's response. "Well, I don't want a target on my back for the foreseeable future, so, as much as I'd love to make him pay, this at the very least ensures that everyone stays protected from him, indefinitely." With a small nod that mirrored his understanding, Jeff let out another sigh as he and Kyle continued conversing. And about a few minutes later, he and the young man rounded up the call. In Hollywood, most people were either morally gray or bad. A morally good person in Hollywood was a rare specimen to come by. Jeff knew this. More than that, he also knew that Kyle, whom he had come to see as the grandson he never had, was one of such rare specimens. That was why he'd been pretty certain that the young man would prioritize his people's safety over his own resentment towards Lex despite having the means to knock him down to the Earth's crust. That, after all, was the smart move to make considering he wasn't exactly the most influential or powerful person in Hollywood despite his ever-surging fame. Not me, though, Jeff mused to himself, his mind made up. Lex, in his opinion, already had it coming for a while now with all the shenanigans he had been pulling behind the scenes. But even then, he'd never felt the need to take him down a notch since he never actively went after those he cherished or called his people. But with Kyle, well, the old Hollywood star was willing to show exactly why he was one of those morally gray individuals in Tinseltown. With a light stroke of his beard, his expression thoughtful, his wife, Barbara, whom was seated opposite him on her own rocking chair on the lawn of their house, closed her book as she stated, "I know that look, sweetie." "Sure you do," Jeff replied with a thin smile as the woman sighed in response. "Whoever it is, just go easy on them, okay?" "I'll try, honey. I'll try." Jeff gave his wife an assuring smile as he pulled up his phone to contact his very own private investigator. Asterisk. Kyle should have arrived home much earlier. But due to Christina's request, he'd had to branch over to a clothing mall to buy a masquerade mask. Walking into his apartment, the door closing behind him with a soft click, the young man casually set aside his shoes, car keys, groceries, and the likes in a familiar motion at their respective spots. Then he moved towards his wardrobe, humming happily, setting aside a sleek, well-tailored light brown suit he hadn't been chanced to wear thus far. The young man gently hooked the mask to its hanger. It was a lightweight, metal Venetian mask, not that Kyle knew. He had simply just bought what he felt looked nice. Closing the wardrobe, the young man was about to proceed to sorting out the groceries when a familiar ding, followed by its familiar phenomenon, happened. "Tallying. Was wondering when you'd pop up," Kyle quietly muttered as he casually retrieved the contents of the grocery bag. And a few minutes later, after he was done stocking them into the freezer, his system, as if in sync, followed up. "Passive skill, bleeding effect, has fully analyzed. Nathan North." Passive skill, bleeding effect, has fully analyzed. Tech whiz. Synergizing alter egos. High-grade active skill, architect, has been awarded. You have acted before everyone and impressed them. You have wrapped up filming for Tech Whiz. Year 1. You have obtained a phenomenal amount of EXP points. 50,000 EXP points have been awarded. Total EXP points available, 216,725. Acting has advanced from level 16 to level 17. Composing has advanced from level 16 to level 17. Advancement in acting will become exponentially harder from here on out. Advancement in composing will become exponentially harder from here on out. Keep acting and composing to improve your skills. Kyle Kestis. EXP points. 216,725. Skills. Soulful vocals, P. Growth spurt, P. Appraisal, A. Resonance, P. S. Charisma, P. Polyglot, P. Deep dive, A. S. Recollection, P. Scene stealer, A. Action and stunt mastery, P. Bleeding effect, P. Detoxification, A. Peak human conditioning, P. Flow, P. Choreography master, P. Mind probe, A. Architect, A. Asterisk EXP points can be used to create skills. Levels. Singing level 18. Acting level 17. Composing level 17. Dancing level 17. Instrument mastery, piano/guitar, level 15/15. Asterisk levels will increase in accordance to your growth. Kyle had long figured out that bleeding effect must have been the cause for his leveling up and stats notification being delayed. But even he would never have expected for the skill to separately analyze the alter egos of both characters he had played in an effort to synergize the best skill to bestow upon him. "I definitely haven't scratched the surface of what you're capable of, I'm sure." He simply shook his head in resignation as he pulled up the new skills details. Active skill, architect. Trace, assimilate and utilize skills from others, redistribute stat levels and grades, and create one-time use items with EXP points. Skill also allows host to affect others with own skills. Using EXP points. Kyle slowly covered his mouth in bewilderment, a few words escaping his lips as he stared at the details of the shiny new, busted skill. My goodness. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 2 days later. Sitting across each other in a high-class restaurant in Toronto that gave a stunning evening view of Lake Ontario, Kyle and Lex, alongside Oliver and Donna respectively, maintained a quiet ambience. Both parties were also dressed formally for the meeting, and no sooner had they given their curt formal greetings, they had gotten down to business. Kyle, as at the moment, was currently reviewing the non-terminating NDA contract as they had previously discussed over the phone, his demeanor composed as he slowly read through the details. As part of the many clauses, there was one in particular that Kyle had ensured was well outlined. In it, Lex and Atlas International pledged to permanently and unconditionally refrain from any form of contact or interference with the young man, his family, his friends, his team, his employees, and his company, regardless of circumstances. In return to accepting all of his demands, the young man would in turn release all the dirt that he had on Lex and Atlas's executives. As Lex watched him flip to the next page, the atmosphere in the room noticeably tense. The calculating CEO soon popped open a bottle of wine and poured some of its content into his glass cup. And after about 20 more minutes of scouring every nook and cranny of the contract to ensure there were in fact no loopholes, Kyle retrieved his pen from his front pocket and signed the NDA. Simultaneously, Oliver gently placed a flash drive on the table, one that Lex casually retrieved and dropped into his inner suit pocket. Kyle sending Lex the warning letter 2 weeks back and purposely ignoring calls from Atlas was just that, a warning, one that was made to essentially flip the way they interacted to reach their current stage of negotiations. Releasing all the dirt he had on the CEO of the industry juggernaut to the media and authorities would have definitely been a very devastating move if he was so willing. In fact, with some of the oh-so-disturbing things both Lex himself and a plethora of Atlas's executive had done, plummeting their company's reputation to the ground and then burying its ashes would just be the beginning for their doom in Tinseltown's glitz and glam. However, been as shrewd as he was, Kyle more than anyone knew that going down that route would ultimately end up with him having more enemies in Hollywood, something he'd much rather avoid if he could. After all, when a group of people as powerful as the multi-billionaire company's CEO had nothing more to lose, there would be no stopping them from going as extreme as required to get something done. Even if that meant going after his people and especially him, with diabolically ill intent for the rest of his life. That was why Kyle had gone down this route instead. One where he got what he wanted without starting an Armageddon in the name of justice. Sure, it was a gray decision to make by not involving the authorities, and Kyle very much knew that, but, in his own opinion, the safety of his people came first and foremost. So, if this was the best way to protect them from Atlas International's shenanigans indefinitely, then so be it. Thank you for your time. Kyle gave a thin, professional smile as he got off the chair, he and Oliver ready to take their leave. As they proceeded to do so, Lex spoke, his words directed solely towards Kyle. You know, Kestis, Donna was right about you. Kyle halted in his steps, and so did Oliver. You are a good man, the manipulative CEO added with a relaxed smile as he casually took a sip of his wine. Gently placing the glass cup atop the table, he locked his steely blue irises on Kyle's sapphires as he continued. You could have gone the destructive route like most would have, just to see me burn, but you've instead chosen the safety of your people. It's commendable, really. But that's why you're a good man, right? And good men, unfortunately, have many rules, don't they? Lex made a last attempt at another power play move, a noticeably dark smile nestling on his lips in an effort to spook the young star. It was essentially his way of saying he could decide to discard the NDA at any time and return to his old ways. However, what he got in return had him rethink his actions as Kyle slowly leaned forward on the desk, stared right into the eyes of the CEO, and, with his sapphire irises projecting the purest form of malice, quietly growled. Screw around one more time, Harlow, and you'll find out exactly why I have so many. Oliver felt a chill run down his spine, and so did Donna, who could have swore in her mind that the temperature surrounding them went down by a couple degrees. Lex especially, despite maintaining an almost unperturbed gaze, was the most affected as he simply sat there, frozen by the sheer, unadulterated malice and cold fury he saw in Kyle's irises. Having set his mind, though, the young man then donned another warm smile as he left the place, Oliver trailing behind him. And when they were in the elevator, the agent glanced over to his now jovial ward and said with an almost curious gaze a few seconds later, "You know, that's the closest I've ever heard you come to using such strong language. Outside of acting, that is. Well, it was a necessary evil to get it through Lex's skull that I'm not interested in playing his mind games." Kyle sported a thin smile in response as the doors opened, both promptly getting off. Soon, they were at the parking lot, their vehicles parked next to the other as Oliver then asked, casually this time, "So where are you headed to?" For a brief moment, Kyle paused as the agent, whom was awaiting his answer, casually opened the door to his Porsche. And then, with a genuinely blissful smile on his features, Kyle replied, his voice trailing off, "I'm going on a date." Oliver felt like someone had nuked him. Sort of, Kyle concluded as he settled into the driver's seat of his Ford Mustang. Oliver, on the other hand, rushed out of his vehicle the moment Kyle's words fully settled in. Yet, before the agent could question his ward, the young man had already ignited the engine of his car, and in a jiffy, he was out of the parking lot, leaving a bamboozled Oliver with so many questions. Chapter 248, Veil? Unveiled. Publishing parties. Traditionally, in the past, around the 80s to 90s glorious days of publishing excess, they were often a sight to behold, with the event usually being fancy, decadent, and wild, to say the least. However, in more recent times, they just weren't as festive anymore, some of them so lackluster and bland, they would be had in a conference room with pizzas delivered as refreshments. But every once in a while, albeit extremely rare, a publishing house which had possibly had an exceptionally good year would throw one of those parties reminiscent of the golden days of publishing houses. And for Paramount Publications, whom had been swimming in money in recent memory due to their back-to-back success for the past 2 years now, they figured they could at least flex their wealth by going all out and throwing a masquerade-themed publishing party. As a result, Christina, whom would have much preferred to stay cooped up in her room writing or reading a script or a novel, had to attend. After all, Evergarden had contributed immensely to the publishing house's success in both years. Added to that, she had also been requested of by the company to join in with more established authors to collaborate on writing their yearly romantic anthology, one that they always released a few days ahead of Valentine's the next year. Most of said authors would also be attending said party to mingle and converse, as even actors, artists, musicians, editors, models, and the likes had also been invited, hence making it somewhat of a necessity for the lady to build up connections of her own. So, with a +2 invite provided for the function, the lady, from the very first moment she found out, had only one person come to mind that she really wanted to have accompany her to the event. That was none other than Kyle, who currently had his breath hitch a bit when he arrived at the lady's apartment. Standing at the doorway was Christina in an elegant, off-the-shoulder strapped, floor-length, navy blue evening gown with flowing, cape-like sleeves draping gracefully over her shoulders. And with her black, fashionable high heels peeking from underneath the beautiful dress, she closed the distance between her and a stunned Kyle, mouthing a few words she was fairly certain he'd grab. "Oh, you look dashing. And you look regal, just like a queen." Kyle soon pulled out of his trance and gave the lady a warm smile, his compliment genuine. With a light blush forming on her cheeks, the gentleman then gestured with his arms for Christina to cuff with. And no sooner had she done that, he carefully led her to his car. Fancy dresses, champagnes, caviar stations. The party was bursting with festivities as laughter filled the air and people mingled without a care in the world. Added to that was the amalgam of high-gloss talents in the room from every facet of Hollywood's vast corners, the entire hall packed and filled to the brim. But, considering no singular person commanded attention from anyone due to most being masked, it made the atmosphere livelier as even lower and middle-class individuals whom were lucky to attend the event could simply walk up to anyone they wanted to meet and strike up a conversation. That said, moving around was becoming a hassle of its own, but no one really seemed to care as they were having a great time. As for Christina, despite being unable to communicate vocally, she had still been able to converse with those whom she wanted to meet as Kyle, currently masked, aided her without drawing the least bit attention to himself. After all, he was masked and his hair was still very much dyed in a darker shade of brown. That said, a few hours later, a tired Christina, much like Kyle whose social battery was rapidly plummeting, took to strolling out for some fresh air in the mazy hedges of the garden. And upon reaching the middle where the fountain was, the lady plopped onto a nearby bench as she tried to kick off her heels. Seeing how lazy she was being about the entire thing, though, especially since this was a pretty amusing and rare sight to him, Kyle politely asked, "Mind if I help?" "I'd appreciate it." Christina signed gratefully. Her ankles and heels were killing her. And so, squatting to her level, gently slipping off the heels, Kyle inquired curiously, "The anthology? What's it about?" Despite hearing the question, Christina, on the other hand, reached for the young man's head, her hands gently ruffling his hair as she giggled mirthfully. To that, Kyle raised his gaze up to see her signing with her free hand in response. "Brown hair really suits you. I'm gonna miss it." "Sure you will." The young man indulged her whims, a light smile forming on his lips as Christina beamed even brighter before she then answered his initial question. "Romance. All kinds." To that, Kyle nodded simply and then, after a brief wall of silence, audibly mused aloud as a couple thoughts pertaining to the subject matter phased across his mind. "Romance, huh?" Noticing his thoughtful gaze mixed with a hint of hesitation, Christina, whom was still gently ruffling his hair, asked by tapping him slightly to get his attention as she signed. "What's on your mind?" "Nothing," Kyle casually replied. "Liar," the lady mouthed as she leaned in, the edges of her eyes crinkling in curiosity. Kyle laughed, his heart at peace. "What is it?" Christina leaned closer, her evergreen irises gleaming in increasing curiosity. "Has anyone ever told you, have mesmerizingly beautiful eyes?" The young man tried to divert her attention. Diversion failed. The lady signed, her tongue poking out slightly. Of course, Kyle laughed again. And then, watching as the beautiful lady kept staring at him like he was the most intriguing being she had ever seen, her gaze arresting, Kyle felt the blood rush to his cheeks as he manned up. Then he requested in a soft tone that was both diffident yet sincere, "Would you like to go on a date sometime with a serious relationship in mind?" Christina froze. A few seconds passed, and she was all the same, the weight of Kyle's words slowly sinking in. The atmosphere was quiet, albeit the soft rush of the fountain's waters added to the natural ambience. "Am I dreaming?" the lady asked herself, a light, dangerous chuckle inwardly ringing in her head. "Yeah, I must be Dre." "No." Kyle, directly inferring the lady's thoughts from the way her irises flickered about in denial, shook his head gently as he continued. "You're not." He gave a pure and heartfelt smile as he slowly lowered his head bashfully. Then Christina saw just how red he was, his blush arguably rivaling hers at the very moment. The reality fully settled in for the lady. And what followed next was a hug so passionate, the young man may as well have gotten his answer. Then both parties tumbled onto the grass, Kyle's sense of equilibrium briefly displaced by her weight. A brief moment of silence descended between them. It was followed by light-hearted chuckles of pure bliss a second after. Sitting atop Kyle, whom had cushioned her fall, her smile radiant and as ethereal as the moon in the sky, the lady leaned in this time, hands cupping his face gently as her adoring green irises seemingly asked, "Can I kiss you?" Kyle understood perfectly, and with a light tuck of her blonde hair behind her ear, he replied with the softest of smiles, "Yes, you can." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next day, everyone's practically being in support of your statement at the press conference, you know? It's gone pretty viral. Oliver, whom was seated opposite Kyle on the couch in the office, casually sipped on his coffee as he stated, "Shouldn't that have died down?" Kyle, on the other hand, glanced over to Owen, who simply shrugged as he handed over the details of today's schedule while responding, "Beats me. I guess they must have really liked how smoothly you handled it." Miguel, whom was sorting through some financial documents pertaining to the movie's post-production, added with a raised gaze, his tone curious. Well, as long as it paints a positive publicity for both you, the game and the movie, it's all good. Gwen, going through some tweet talk comments on her page, chimed in with a peppiness to her voice. As for Stuart and Camille, they simply gave curt nods of agreement to the PR manager's words. A brief moment of comfortable silence descended into the office, only for Oliver, whom had figured out after a night of pondering to purposely, and with a very deliberate and smug smile, speak. So Kyle felt alarm bells set off in his head the moment he caught the hint of amusement in his agent's tone. But before he could come up with a way to counter, Oliver dropped the bombshell, one brow slightly arched. How was the date with Christina? As the agent took another sip of his coffee, everyone in the room suddenly freezing at the info, they slowly turned their heads, directing an amused, prodding gaze in their boss's direction. And unfortunately for Kyle, his face had taken up the brightest shade of red as flashes of he and Christina's kiss from yesternight came rushing in. This, as one would expect, further prompted his team to begin teasing him while simultaneously asking for the deets. A few minutes later, though, after they'd all had their fill of teasing him, Owen especially glowing in sick joy as everyone else shook their heads in resignation at his shenanigans, Gwen returned to going through her feed, only to stumble upon a post that had her in wary confusion as she tentatively asked, Kyle, Oliver, you guys sure you signed that NDA with Lex like you said? Glancing over to each other, a similarly wary expression forming on their features, both individuals, alongside every other person in the room, soon huddled around her laptop. And when they read the post, just like her, with all the incriminating evidence laid bare, Owen was the first to let out a few words that mirrored everyone's thoughts. Oh, they're so royally screwed. Yeah, you're right. They are, Kyle stated, he and Oliver's expression already morphing into a mix of pure amusement and relief as he concluded. And thankfully, this has nothing to do with us. There's a saying, karma's a bitch, and reflected in its current impartial judgment was a post from a popular Hollywood publication whom had posted the link to the incriminating article on their Tweet Talk page with the caption, Atlas International Through the Years, Industry Juggernaut or Hollywood's Lucifer. Chapter 249, Hot Mess. Atlas International found themselves in a paralyzing ditch, one they wouldn't be getting out of anytime soon. Over the course of the years, they'd been finding themselves at the center of one controversy or the other, sure, but this had taken the cake for one of the biggest scandals they had ever pulled that was brought forth to the limelight. And that was none other than how they had instigated and orchestrated the last year's seemingly normal Hollywood strike to increase their already vast reach of control. In the original post, which had now resurfaced on so many websites, each with variations of their own, were many leaked voice recordings of Lex and his execs talking about exercising their control to rig certain movements in their favor, alongside a fair few unsavory statements that all pointed to one singular thing: monopoly, an act that was immensely frowned upon by everyone in the industry and was even punishable by law due to the way they had abused it. For so many years, victims of their predatory actions had been calling for attention to the things they were doing in secret, but without concrete evidence. Their claims fell on deaf ears. However, this time, thanks to Jeff's invisible hand in the entire thing, getting the required evidence had been a cinch. Now, every blessed one of said victims was coming out of the woodwork, ready for their piece of the pie as they began to file lawsuits to sue the company, one after the other in the name of justice. Justice, my ass. All they want is some big fat cash to soothe their losses. Lex massaged his temples with a deep frown as Donna dropped yet another lawsuit document onto his table. But what really had Lex extremely frustrated was that none of this came from Kyle and his team. Rather, the moment the entire thing had happened, he'd received a call from the Prime Mastermind stating, in case you ever think of going back on the NDA you signed with the kid, remember, I have just as much dirt on you and your chums as that fixer of yours. This isn't threat, Lex. It's a final warning. Stay out of the kid's business if you know what's good for you. As the CEO recalled the words that played in his head, he couldn't help groan in extreme frustration and anger. Jeff was one of those people in Hollywood everyone hated messing with due to how vastly connected he was, more so than even he himself despite how happy-go-lucky he seemed. As a result, in hindsight, Lex couldn't help but feel like he'd flown a bit too close to the sun with his previous actions considering the old Hollywood star, and Kyle seemed very familiar with the other. I should have just left Kestis alone, he muttered to himself in defeat. After all, regardless of how things played out, the non-terminating NDA he had signed with the young man already had him leashed for life. And now, unfortunately, he was fully on Jeffrey Dixon's radar. Due to the backlash from social media, fables and legends, regardless of how much Atlas International had invested in it, suffered due to the scandal incident. As a result, the industry juggernaut's analysts and marketing department had long predicted that it probably wouldn't perform as well as they projected at the box office. After all, most people in this day and age, in the name of parading their virtues, like to boycott anything that had a whiff of corruption to it, so as not to be labeled as a supporter of such vile practices. This, obviously, was also reflected in the way people talked about it on various social media platforms, Tweet Talk especially. Potter's Wand. I was planning to watch both Tech Whiz, Year 1, and Fables and Legends originally come there. Release in December, but now, I know which to delegate to the not interested list. Lord_hold my malt. I completely agree at Potter's Wand. Man, I just can't trust they do a good job anymore, because clearly, it's never about art with these people. It's always about power and control. Violence is the only way. I must admit, I was expecting the yearly Atlas International scandal ET controversy. Never thought it'd be this big in all honesty. Kinda sucks to see though since Fables and Legends, definitely going to suffer as a result. Ride my stallion. I am so boycotting Fables and Legends. I refuse to support a film backed by a company that manipulates entire industries for profit. We need to hold these studios accountable. Wild West Outlaw at Ride My Stallion. Hold your horses, cowboy. What does Atlas's bullcrap have to do with what will probably be a masterpiece of a movie? I'ma go see it for myself, then decide. Film_insider. If it is a masterpiece of a movie at Wild West Outlaw, y'all trust these studios to not fumble the bag. Way too much. After all, in an interview with the movie's director recently, they said they'd taken creative liberties to enhance the storytelling. If that doesn't scream red flags, I don't know what does. Ace Attorney. It's one thing to tread the line of monopoly. It's another to abuse that supposed monopoly. Atlas better get those seat rests cushioned, cause boy oh boy they're gonna be visiting them courts like crazy in the coming months with all the plethora of lawsuits filed against them. As the public perception towards the live action of Martineau, Ronan's epic changed unfavorably, a collateral side effect of Atlas's current situation, Cassandra, whom was scrolling through the comments section, glanced over to her husband, who let out a dejected sigh. There. She rubbed his back with a gentle smile as the fanboy let out another listless sigh. He does realize, this means less competition, right? Hank couldn't help but ask his fellow producer in a whisper as he sat on the same couch as they did. All three were presently in the Dot Productions executive suite, and so were Kyle, Jeff, Oliver, Bruce, and a coffee-deprived Mark who could really use some shut-eye. Chill. Just let him mope about it. He'll get over it soon. She whispered back in response, her hands gently stroking Xavier's back. Considering he had been oh so close from getting to adapt Stray Wolves, one of Martin's books, the fact that he had been unable to left him a bit sad. Fortunately, Kyle coming in clutch back then to have him direct the live adaptation of the now popular comic book took his mind of it. But hearing that Fables and Legend might tank at the box office, not because of the Atlas situation, but because of the statement the director of the movie made over creative liberties to improve the storytelling, had him genuinely worried. Bold statements like that in Hollywood, especially for a live action adaptation, never bode well, and neither did Xavier think it'd magically change now. In any case, as Kyle conversed with Jeff, Oliver, Bruce, and Mark, their conversation soon veered towards the havoc the old Hollywood star had caused Atlas International. Look, if their movie's great, it's gonna perform well at the box office, regardless of public perception. Jeff defended, his voice cool, whilst gesturing to all four who shook their heads in resignation as he continued. In fact, all this heat they're getting will only draw more attention and publicity to them and quite possibly increase their box office earnings. If their movie's good, that is. However, If it's not up to snuff, well then I guess they'll have to deal with the consequences of their own actions. He remarked casually, not the least bit perturbed by his actions. Besides, they've had it coming for a while now. Consider this my way of giving them an added precaution and a reminder to keep their mangy hands off of you. Jeff concluded as he directed his gaze towards Kyle with a pointed finger. In response, Kyle went over to give the old star a side hug, one that had his wrinkled features lighting up a bit as the young man stated, his tone warm, yet genuinely appreciative despite the humor in them. Has anyone ever told you you're such a Papa Bear? Instantly, Bruce and Mark followed up playfully. You mean Grandpa Bear? I take pride in both. The old star gave a proud shrug, earning a small, hearty chuckle from all four. Well, regardless of it all, I still feel we might clash fiercely at the box office, especially since it'll be landing in cinemas worldwide on the 3rd week of December. Oliver was the one to speak this time, his expression thoughtful. In response, everyone gave brief, approving nods. After all, the holidays, aside from being a familial festive period, presented the best time for most children and adults whom were off school and work respectively to flock to the cinemas in the hopes of having a good time. That meant that if Fables and Legends was even just a tad bit of a nice experience, it would definitely perform quite well at the box office. Even then, no one in the room felt like the live adaptation Martineau, Ronan's epic, even if Atlas International's situation hadn't come to the limelight, would have given Tech Whiz Year One a run for its money. After all, they were certain of what they created. But more than, they were extremely confident in delivering an experience that would have the audience coming back to the theaters even after a second seating. Added to that, the game's DLC release in November had been synergized with packed promotions, one they were certain would draw multitudes of people to the cinemas. Essentially, the team was ready to dominate the box office. Still, December 20th was a month and few weeks away, its premiere occurring the day before. Yet, it was also, fairly, a hop, skip, and a jump away, one that arrived much sooner rather than later. Chapter 250, Loving Homage. Monday, 19th of December, 2022. AMC Lincoln Square 13. Standing tall on Broadway, its iconic marquee glowed as it announced the grand premiere of Tech Whiz Year One. Despite the subtle shower of snow, the streets outside were alive with energy as fans and paparazzi alike pressed against metal barricades and posters behind, their voices mingling in a cacophony of excitement as their cameras flashed. Sleek black SUVs, alongside a plethora of high-class vehicles rolled up as celebrities, alighted from them and stepped onto the crimson red carpet that stretched towards the entrance. And in expected fashion, the paparazzi and fans alike were there to bombard them with their screams and requests. However, things weren't exactly at peak buzz until the main cast began arriving. Xavier, Cass, look over here. How does it feel to be one of Hollywood's power couples? Sharon, Lily, you're both stunning. Over here, give a pose for the cameras. Oh, is that the Clint Rockwood guy? Oh yeah, it's him. He plays Malachi in the movie. Jeffrey, give us a cool pose like you always do. As the main cast shuffled their way into the theater, whilst briefly indulging in the requests of the press, other involved individuals in the movie's production soon showed up. Bruce, Mark, Hank and Oliver, who came with Tiana, alongside the rest of Kyle's team, and some his employees at Spawn Point Studio also arrived on ground. The same could be said for a bunch of movie critics, journalists, reporters, and influencers alike, who quickly made their way into the theater. However, it didn't take long before everyone watched as a familiar Ford Mustang pulled up on scene. Despite his immense fame and wealth, it had always painted a very humble image to the press and fans alike that Kyle only had 2 vehicles, one in Canada and the other in New York, both also being of the same model as he frequently shuttled between both locations. Alighting from the vehicle in sleek, black, leather Chelsea boots, his form-fitting, well-tailored, dark gray suit sticking to his body like second skin, coupled with his gelled hair now back to its normal shade of raven black, Kyle was dazzlingly handsome. And in turn, paparazzi and fans alike bombarded him with a plethora of questions and requests while flashing their cameras in a frenzy. Kyle, over here, over here. How does it feel knowing hundreds of fans are here just for you? Are you confident in the movie being a box office blockbuster? KK, Any message for the Tech Whiz fans? Yet, instead of walking straight down the red carpet in response to their blaring flashes of camera lights, Kyle instead gave a warm smile, waved over slightly, and then walked to the other side of his car. Audible murmurs began to surface from the press as their thoughts churned, seemingly in a mix of disbelief, delight, and palpable anticipation as they seemed to imply what was going on. Wait, don't tell me. A date. As the press watched the young star gently open the door to the front passenger seat, a lady's high heels gently alighting from the car, they soon watched as she fully stepped out. Dressed in a long, sexy, backless, sequined gray formal dress to match Kyle's was Christina, her hands gently tucking the front pieces of her intricate, updo blonde hair behind her ear. Holding his arm out for her to cuff with, the lady beamed slightly at him while mouthing the words, "Thank you. You're welcome." Kyle reciprocated with a soft smile as he led her down the carpeted walkways. And as one would expect, the response from the press was rabid-like as they instantly began blurting out all their thoughts and burning questions in intense and frenzied curiosity. Oh, I'm gonna print dollar bills today. Christina Aubert. Kyle, when did this happen? Kyle, who is she? Is this your official red carpet debut as a couple? Christina, you look stunning. How long have you two been seeing each other? Kyle, are you two matching outfits on purpose? Is this a statement? Is this a one-time red carpet appearance together, or should we expect more? Kyle, a quick pose together for the cameras, please. Can we also get a kiss? Yet, through it all, Kyle simply maintained a warm smile with a light wave as he felt Christina's grip tighten around his arms. In an effort to ease her nerves, he then whispered slightly, his voice teasing, "All right, blondie locks." Christina looked up at him with widened eyes before he could even complete his sentence, the pupils of her evergreen irises seemingly saying, "That's a new one. You like it?" Kyle then asked with flexed brows, a light smile forming on his lips. The lady bobbled her head with a blooming smile, one that had the young man laughing softly. Considering Christina had very much grown to adore all of Kyle's pet names for her, a new addition to the catalog had her noticeably excited. Yet unknown to the lady, she didn't even realize when they'd completely left the carpeted walkways, her nervousness having long vanished. But for the press whom had been within vicinity, they couldn't help but stare at some of the mesmerizing shots they had taken of the new couple. In it, both individuals looked completely smitten with the other as Kyle sported a happy laugh and Christina's smile bloomed like a firework in the night sky. Asterisk. Making their way into the dazzling and luxurious lobby fitted with giant LED screens that cycled through the Tech Whiz. Year 1. Posters, Kyle and Christina, soon dispersed to meet various familiar faces. There was a scent of high-class wine and freshly popped popcorn in the air, one that mingled with the hum of excited conversations. The main cast, alongside other celebrities, filmmakers, and invited industry peers weaved through the space, pausing at branded backdrops where reporters and journalists on ground eagerly awaited sound bites. As for the movie critics, they simply lounged around, most waiting for the main attraction of the premiere to begin. One of such movie critics was Elena Whitmore, who worked for a popular publication company that went by the name of Daily Burglar. Being one of their top movie critics, one that was dedicated solely to giving an objective view to Hollywood movies without any of her emotions involved, the lady couldn't wait to do her job. Even if she was a geek whom had read through every possible issue of the comics in her spare time in preparation for its release. Having reviewed Fables and Legends after their premiere a few days back at the TCL Chinese Theater in LA, though, the lady could confidently say that despite all the backlash Atlas International had suffered over the past month, their movie still had a potential to be a hit. If only they didn't split the first book into 2 parts, just to milk the franchise, though. Elena mused to herself as she watched Christina Aubert, giggling and conversing with Lily Lockhart and Sharon Winters alongside Jasmine Faye and Tiana Rivers, both of whom had been invited to the premiere. Considering the movie critic had no idea Kyle and Christina were an item though since she had arrived earlier, she couldn't quite place a finger on why all 4 were being so animated. In any case, as she snatched up a glass of wine from one of the caterers moving about her, Gaze soon cascaded over the venue till it landed on Clint Rockwood, whom was being interviewed at the branded backdrop as the old Hollywood star, Jeffrey Dixon, soon joined in. As for Kyle Kestis, the man of the hour whom she spotted much later, he was currently posing for the cameras alongside a smiling Xavier and Cassandra Cage. About a half hour later, though, everyone was soon guided over to the IMAX auditorium for the screening to commence. Eyes perking up with purpose, Elena swiftly downed another glass of wine, the empty glass placed gently atop her table. Briskly, she moved alongside the crowd to reach the auditorium, which was complete with plush, reclining seats that filled its stadium-style arrangement, a crystal-clear projection system, and a surround sound setup that was sure to make every explosion, whisper, and electrifying moment in the superhero movie feel visceral. And after a few minutes of shuffling around the auditorium and settling into their seats, the house lights dimmed, signifying the start of the movie as the projector came to life, its projection displayed on the high-resolution IMAX screen. With a hushed anticipation thick in the air, the logo of Spawn Point Studios appearing on the massive screen, which was then followed by Dot Productions' logo, the movie finally began. And as the first scene with Catherine, Malachi, and the scientists played out, Elena, just like everyone else in the room, strapped themselves in. The movie had very much kicked off to a strong start. Now, can it maintain it? Elena mused to herself, her attention rapt. Her answers? Well, she got them in the next 2 hours and 30 minutes. By the time the credits finally rolled, complete with a shocking post-credit scene that shook the very framework of everything that they'd been experiencing, Elena found herself, much like everyone else in the auditorium, applauding like there was no tomorrow. Directors, producers, and the likes soon flocked towards the main cast, Kyle, Clint, and Sharon, receiving the most attention. Director Cage, alongside his wife, were also in the spotlight as they were immediately surrounded by a plethora of industry peers. There was no denying it. Tech Whiz, Year One, was set to be 2022's superhero blockbuster despite releasing so late into the year. That said, a few hours later when the movie critic had finally reached her home, she had been so excited that she immediately kicked off her shoes to the side and pulled up her laptop as she settled onto her bed. So many words to convey what she had experienced a few hours earlier came to mind. Yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that only a couple words were needed to convey exactly how Tech Whiz Year One made her feel. And with speedy taps of her laptop's keyboard, she dropped her unbiased review. Daily Burglar, Tech Whiz Year One, a loving homage to the comics like no other. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Screening. Reviews of Fables and Legend had long hit the internet, 2 days before superhero blockbusters premiere. Cinema Flicks. Fables and Legends delivers on its promise of adapting Martin O'Ronin's epic dark fantasy adventure in a way that feeds escapism that feels personal and profound. Yet, it also takes its dark plot very seriously as it tackles some serious themes involving loss, war, and heroism. Entertainment Weekly. With so much passion on display, Fables and Legend is cinematic masterpiece that had me immediately captivated and transported to the lands of Thrinodia from the very first scene. The film's sweeping vistas, meticulously crafted sets, and stunning visual effects are a feast for the eyes, but it's the characters, story, and themes that truly make it a great adaptation of a widely beloved franchise. Daily Burglar. Now, Fables and Legend might have started off really strong, especially with how lovingly crafted each scene is alongside its stellar cast of actors who actually seem to have read the source material, but where it falls short is its insistence on drawing out the story in the last hour. Still, I'd recommend the movie to anyone hoping to have a good time at the cinemas. Seeing the mix of 4 to 5 stars on their reputable Mashed Potatoes website, as opposed to the typical plethora of 5 stars across the board that most action-adventure fantasy blockbusters typically had, gave most fans of the book's array of hope. It at least painted the image that the reviews were genuine and they could at least hope to have a great time at the cinemas, despite the hot mess Atlas International had found themselves in a month and a few weeks back. However, when the reviews of Tech Whiz Year One began popping up on the site after its premiere, with only the rare and occasional 4-star, fans of the comic books couldn't help but be a bit wary. Den of Nerds. My goodness, where do we start? There's so much to talk about, from the stellar acting to the CGI, the vibrant artistic direction, the soundtrack, the soundtrack, and especially the plot. Everything about Tech Whiz Year One is just bursting with unbridled passion, like umami in your favorite cooking anime. You can't help but want to book a second screening immediately. Critical hit. Whereas most superhero blockbusters focus solely on the spectacle, and mind you, Tech Whiz Year One has some truly mind-blowing ones. This movie has just as much of a compelling storyline that solidifies what it means to be a superhero. Hollywood Bugle. Tech Whiz Year One starts off generic, but by the time you're viewing those credits, trust me, the only thing you'll be wishing for is that it never ended. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it's emotional, sometimes hilarious, definitely compelling, and just an all-round love letter to fans of the comics. Definitely one of the best superhero movie in years. When things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. This was a mantra a lot of people, knowingly or unknowingly, tended to live by. Yet, at the same time, humans at their core are hopeful souls. And that was why, for the millions of fans around the world whom had been eagerly waiting for the movie to drop for close to a year plus now, they hoped that truly, Tech Whiz Year One was as good as it was lauded to be. After all, tomorrow, it would land in cinemas for all and sundry to make their own verdicts as to whether it deserved all the accolades it was getting or not. Chapter 251, Jump. 20th of December, 2022. Situated just outside the very same AMC Lincoln Square 13 theater where the premiere for the superhero movie had happened the day before, a plethora of individuals dressed in thick winter wear slowly shuffled into the theater after buying their tickets. However, a fair few meters from theater were a bunch of teenagers whom had banded together for a group date. Yet, amidst them all was a guy who seemingly didn't have a date like his peers, his gaze focused on his phone as he leaned on the wall while smiling amusedly. Kyle's girlfriend. Honda. Oh, Honda. Kyle has a girlfriend now. Where does that leave me? What am I supposed to do? Honda. Oh, Honda. Princess Peach at Kyle's girlfriend. Hate to be that gal, but you were just a self-proclaimed girlfriend. There were even model versions of you at some point. Speaking of the model versions, where are they? Kyle's girlfriend 2.0. Still alive and kicking at Princess Peach. Handuk. Oh, Handuk. Kyle's girlfriend 3.0. Me too. Handuk. Oh, Handuk. Waifu with their rocket launcher. And they're out of the woodworks. Also, I know what you're thinking, but no. I'm not nuking you three, not today. I'm in a really good mood since I'll be watching Tech Whiz Year One soon, so the launcher's safely stashed away. Mamma mia. There you three. Kyle's off the market now, so it'd be in your best interests to go find another boyfriend. Also, I hear Kestina's now a thing. Damn, the internet works fast. We do a bit of trolling. I'm clutching my ribs at the moment. Hope I don't choke on my popcorn if I have to remember this string of chats mid-watching the movie. And yes, at Mamma Mia, Kestina is a thing. Peter_writes_fantasy. Taking a break from writing today, as I'm very much burnt out and I need a vacation. Thankfully, I purchased my tickets the other day, so I'm heading over to the cinemas right now. As his peers decided over what to watch, especially since they had bought the tickets to both movies a day before, Derek soon began to type on his phone in response to the group messages. Whiz Lord, we'll be seeing the movie in a couple minutes too, at Peter_writes_fantasy. Hopefully it's as great as the reviews. P.S. I know it will cause KK never disappoints. I'm still salty that Kyle's got a girlfriend now, so no. Ain't watching Tech Whiz Year One. Kim A. Pretty teenage blonde with a brunette, pouted as she grasped onto her date's arm, who squinted disapprovingly in her direction as he disagreed. I say we watch the superhero movie. Leo, a bulky-looking teen with a military buzz cut whom was also the linebacker of their high school's football team, stated, despite Kim glaring at him from the side. What do you say, Danny? He then inquired of their quarterback and captain of their football team, who currently had his arms folded as he stated angrily. Fables and legend. Huh. I thought you said you wanted to watch the superhero movie. Leo clarified, but, upon seeing the annoyance on his buddy's face, he begrudgingly sighed in resignation. Fine. We'll watch the fantasy epic. In response, Kim let out a gloat to which Leo pinched her cheeks in retaliation as the quarterback gave his appreciation. Thanks, man. Don't mention it. Leo gave a curt nod as he kept pulling his girl's cheek. Ow, ow, ow. I'm sorry, Kim kept pleading in response. Despite how much Daniel had been looking forward to the movie, though, especially with his twin brother hyping it up even further for the past month due to the DLC being released to rave critical and commercial success, he was still hell-bent on not wanting to watch it today. Not anymore. Why? Well, because he hated the idea of being in the same environment as his ex-girlfriend Mary Jane, the captain of their high school's cheerleading squad, whom was also on ground. And, just like the shameful minx that she was, she soon angled her attention towards the other twin whom had suddenly become more and more handsome in recent memory as she bit her lip. So, Derek, are you really planning to go see the movie on your own? Mary Jane asked with a flirtatious smile. Raising his gaze from his phone mid-scroll, Derek replied curtly, his tone blunt. No. Then why don't MJ moved towards him with a seductive smile, hoping to rope him into her spell, only for a familiar presence to halt her as she stood before her boyfriend, her voice dripping with disgust. Hands off, wench. He's mine. A bunch of people nearby instantly turned their heads in their direction. Who are you calling wench? MJ retaliated in annoyance as Linda affirmed, her tone curious. Too mild? How's about slow? And that's enough from you, babe. Derek swiftly grabbed his girl by the hand as he led her away from the group before they made a scene. He definitely rubbed off on her since they'd started dating a year back with his sarcasm and dry wit. Not that he wasn't proud of it. Yet, an embarrassed MJ could only watch in frustration as the dolled-up Linda whipped her head back at the last minute and stuck her tongue out in petty fashion. With a reddened face, Daniel watched as the cheerleading captain huffed her way past him and into the cinema. The only problem? By the time he himself got into the auditorium to watch Fables and Legends, there she was. Again, seated right next to him. Dang it, the popular twin inwardly cussed. Finally, in the cinema's auditorium, popcorns and soda in hand, Derek and Linda settled in to watch the movie alongside many others. As the next scene after the cryptic opening followed, complete with the clunky, sputtery contraption making breakfast, the audience, even those whom had never read the comics, inferred. A resourceful genius. Yet, as they watched George walk up the staircase to meet with his grandson, the contrast in what they were expecting from this supposed genius caught them off guard. It's a gotcha. Don't ask. Up to your money-grubbing ways again. Gramps, my only goal in life, as you know, is passive income. A wave of silent, amused chuckles filled up the auditorium. Yep, that's the Nathan North I know, hiding behind capitalism as a coping mechanism. Derek tossed a few popcorns into his mouth with an excited expression, one that had Linda chuckling as she stared at his side frame. It very much reminded her of a particularly popular meme. Soon enough, though, the lady herself returned her attention to the screen, her gaze similarly excited. Her boyfriend being a geek about the comics, especially with the fact that he had taught her how to play the game, definitely fueled her interest in the movie even though she hadn't read the comics. Morning, sir. Pounce-a-lot. How's the weather up there? Watching as Nathan greeted their cat, both her and the audience let out another wave of amused giggles, only to feel the subtle switch in his bright mood as stared at the door of his mom's room afar. He's such a great actor. Linda couldn't help but appreciate Kyle's acting as Nathan's eyes reflected a plethora of complex, flickering emotions. And so, as they watched Nathan bolt out of the house after his conversation with his gramps a few minutes later, many in the auditorium soon had themselves laughing this time when a particularly funny scene came next. Stupid, useless, overpriced, Java-coded, no good, nickel-gobbling, tin tyrant. Derek almost choked on his soda at the way Felicia's frustrated angst was delivered despite already expecting it. It was one of the most beloved character introductions in the comics, so seeing Sharon nail it in real time had him thinking as light chuckle escaped his lips. Some scenes just feel better on the big screen, don't they? And with that, as Nathan came to her rescue with his mini vacuum, Malachi was soon introduced to the audience too as the tardy duo arrived late to the class. Fashionably late, I see. Especially you, Mississippi Danvers. Not exactly the algorithmic precision one would expect from future tech innovators. Linda tugged on her boyfriend's arm as she whispered, "That's that overclock guy, right? In the live-action flesh, yes." Derek whispered right back, earning a proud giggle from the lady who returned her attention to the screen. Then the next few parts played out, Felicia and Nathan's interaction with their professor, and alongside the young man's seemingly money-grubbing personality, giving the audience something to chuckle over again. He looks so warm, though. Wonder what happened to him. And why is his arm fine? Linda's question, however, kept piling up as she stared at Malachi, whom had resumed teaching. Yet she knew she'd get her answers over the course of the movie's plot. Despite being a superhero movie, everyone seemed to be enjoying how it started off easy and slow, only for them to be thrust right back into the active plot as Malachi revealed to Nathan how he and his mom were colleagues alongside other details the young man was curious about, as he also warned him not to go digging around for clues. Then the scenes phased by quickly as Nathan arrived back home, the emotive score grasping some people. And as he turned around the corner to stare at his mom's door once again, the brief flashback playing over, a clearly excited Derek silently repeated word for word after Caitlin North. "Genius isn't just about what you can build, Nathan. It's about what you choose to do with the things you build. The right hands can build a better world, sweetie, but the wrong hands can absolutely decimate it. Always be the hands that build." The next few scenes after, despite the emotional weight it previously carried as Nathan made his way into his mom's room for the first time in years, pretty much vanished when the phenomenon happened to him. The look of sheer shock and a slight hints of horror on some people's features were palpable as Kyle's acting in the scene had them spooked beyond measure till he finally passed out. That was intense. Linda took a small sip of her soda as he watched the next scene play out with Malachi in the secret chamber. And when the audience saw whom was in it, a bunch of them gasped, same as Linda, whose eyes widened in disbelief as the professor spoke in a cold voice that contrasted greatly from his previous warmth. "And trust me, I'll make them pay. Every last one of them. This Clint guy's a really good actor." Derek mused with a thin smile as the scene showed a flashback scene of him busting into an executive meeting where Eccleston had been a jerk alongside his other executives, grounding the audience's understanding of Malachi's unforgiving resentment and fury. "Oh, I see. He loved her." Linda had one of her questions answered as she understood what had changed the once seemingly good man. Then the scene transitioned back to Nathan's house the next morning, his Gramps waking him up as he ascended the stairs a few seconds later. "Hands that build." It was a janky game anyway. Terrible third-rate copy. Seeing as Nathan ended up not going with uploading the gotcha, an accepting smile on his lips, someone's "I would've for real" mutter amongst the audience soon had Linda and Derek quietly chuckling alongside a few others in the room. Then the couple had their eyes perk up when Nathan's hands suddenly glowed in a shade of blue circuitry, the rest of the scene playing out as he began to figure out that something abnormal was going on with his physiology. "Nate, everything good up there?" "Yeah, I'm okay, Gramps. Just, tripped over a cable." "It's just as chaotic as I remember." Derek smiled familiarly as he watched on. From there, it was the science fair scene as everyone watched the young man discreetly go about tracing gadgets till he ran into his professor unexpectedly. "Ah, Nathan, I see you've come to check the serum too. It is quite curious." "Oh," Derek inwardly commented as he, much like many other fans, figured out that Malachi had noticed something off with Nathan's physiology. After all, it was his gloved hand that he had used to shake him before bidding each other farewell. As for the general audience, that was a cool little hint they'd probably catch in their next seating as they simply watched Nathan bump into Felicia a few seconds later. It's a small, harmless tool, really. Perfect for everyday annoyances. You'd be surprised by how many things get stuck in various places on a regular. I'm listening. Thumbtacks in a corkboard. Gum on your shoe. Splinter in your finger. Popcorn in your tonsils. Yeah, that last one really sucks. Trust me. A cascading wave of chuckles filled up the hall at Nathan's words, and so did Linda, who gently nodded her head as she inwardly stated, "So true." However, the moment Nathan had asked the lady why she was always so late and tired was the moment everything went south at the science fair with the ominous words "overclock" booming through the event center. Man, Overclock actually feels terrifying. Derek thought to himself as most of the general audience in the room took in the scale of the damage, injury, and fatality the cyborg had caused. To them, that increased the stakes as it made them feel like the story wasn't just going to be watered down for the sake of being family-friendly like most superhero movies did. It perfectly painted Overclock as a villain and not a vigilante of sorts, especially since he was willing to cause death, collaterally, just to get what he wanted. The serum. That realization, as the audience kept watching, led to the next scenes where Nathan also realized what he needed to do as he began to create his exosuit with all the gadgets he had traced. UI. It's Awake by Kickback Radio. Derek began bopping his head to the soundtrack as the montage of scenes played on, Nathan experimenting with one advanced tech after the other. Linda, whom had noticed and also knew the song thanks to Derek practically blasting it on repeat at his home for months on end, soon realized that a couple other fans in the room were doing the exact same thing, a few of them even singing along in light murmurs. Then, when the time finally came for Nathan to test the suit, Derek adjusted in his seat as he leaned forward, his gaze full of excited anticipation, much like everyone else in the room. The score, however, was what had Linda, much like so many of the general audience, feeling like this scene was going to be epic. Hope I live to regret this. And as they watched a fully suited Nathan bounce atop his boots hesitantly, only to bolt forwards afterwards, almost everyone in the cinema had the exact same thought surface in their minds as his boots reached the ledge of the building. Jump. Chapter 252. Worth every dollar. Jump. It was the shared thought most in the auditorium had as the score swelled. Yet the moment tech was dived instead, Derek's eyes widened in surprise, one that was reflected in every other fan's gaze in the cinema, which was glued to the IMAX screen. As they watched him plummet downwards, the score constantly pulsating in rhythmic, heavy-hitting percussions that synced with their heartbeats, the payoff of a different approach from the comics came. The surround sound system in the cinema seemed to amp the orchestral heroic score as it burst forth, sending electrifying chills of excitement through everyone's spine as Tech was glided with his wingsuit. Watching the hero landed perpendicularly to the building, the slow-motion CGI reflected in their irises as he took his very first grav step up the building, Derek, alongside a couple. Fans in the cinema couldn't help but want to scream at the top of their lungs like the fanboys they were. But since they could disrupt other people's viewing experience, they reeled in their unbridled excitement the best they could. Yet, even Linda, much like the general audience, wanted to do the same as Nathan's childlike scream of exhilaration boomed through the speakers. And so, as they watched him chain his runs with his retractable hook and wingsuit, alongside executing a plethora of stylized movements, including the corkscrew through the concrete pipe, the feeling of excitement in the hall palpably increased. I'm the best. A string of excited chuckles, verging on becoming a full-on laugh of exhilaration as Nathan praised himself for a job well done on his first run, cascaded through the room. Yet most completely fell off the verge, their mirthful laughs ringing the loudest the moment he fell gracelessly down the building. Linda and Derek were among those who did. Yet, the moment the fanboy, alongside other hardcore gamers in the hall, noticed whom the people dressed in motion capture suits were, they widened their gazes in shocked disbelief. Well, this is awkward. Another wave of laughter from these group of fans in the hall caught the general audience off guard as theirs rang louder. Linda, too, angled her gaze over to her boyfriend, unsure of what was causing him to go into another fit of laughter. Yet, that experience was short-lived as the movie went on, the scene moving over to the scene where Nathan had to save Felicia from the thugs. And upon watching as he quickly dispatched of them, a terrified Felicia still spooked beyond measure as Tech gave her a brief nod. Linda thought to herself, wonder if she'll ever find out it's Nathan. However, for Derek, who had his gaze focused on the screen as he watched the next scene where Nathan sat in a lotus position before his helmet in his dorm room, he smiled as he inwardly commented, I'm so glad they took the liberty of adding this scene. The scene, despite how brief it was one practically everyone could feel the weight of as they realized through Nathan's deep, purposeful gaze that he wanted to be something more than just a vigilante. This was the halfway mark of the movie, so when the next few scenes played out, the audience, much like the fans in the room, felt a sense of heroism from Nathan as he started helping out around his Gramps' home shelter neighborhood. Oh, so that's how he got the name Tech Whiz. Linda smiled warmly as she watched another scene where the masked hero left a "Your local Tech Whiz" note after jump-starting a car for a man. With an electric pulse, the vehicle sputtered to life as the man who was late for work thanked Tech Whiz profusely. Added to that, the audience soon understood why Felicia was always so tired as a fairly long scene after showed her coming off her night shift as she walked through the neighborhood, her gaze spotting Tech Whiz as he helped a young girl grab her cat off a tree. But one of Nathan's great moments of heroism, unbeknownst to even fans and general audience alike, came a couple moments after the burning building scene. I take it you're not going to tell me who you are and why you're doing tea. The less you know, the better. You've been warned. As Derek watched the overclock-worn Tech Whiz in genuine curiosity, the backdrop raging with flames, he didn't realize he had unconsciously leaned forward as he mused. I don't remember this scene from the comics. However, as the familiar banger of a soundtrack slowly pulsed in the background just as Tech Whiz analyzed that the building would soon explode, the fanboy felt his excitement similarly ramp up. Higher stimulus. Water. Yes, water. I should be able to run on water and create a tidal wave. Wait, don't tell me he's gone. Derek, much like other fans in the room, hadn't even finished his thoughts when Nathan's words gave them their answers. Assuming weight is 195 pounds of force per step for vertical suspension and surface tension, necessary fluid drag in tight zigzag formations should be, oh for God's sake, just run. As the heroic orchestral piece burst forth once more with Tech Whiz blitzing across the body of water, every core fan of the comics and video game let out an unbridled cheer of exhilaration, this time without care for where they were. Even the general audience couldn't help but be amazed as they watched the amazing scene, the title surging forth as Tech Whiz executed tight zigzag formations to increase the water's drag. Watching as it was brought to shore to douse the flaming inferno, Linda tightly grabbed her boyfriend's arm as she whispered in awe. That was so amazing. I know, right? Derek replied in kind, with a thrilled grin. No sooner had the scene ended, though, with every citizen within vicinity chanting his name loudly, the exhilarated audience was soon treated to the twist that came a few scenes after. And it was at this moment that Derek and other hardcore fans in the room finally had a shocked expression on their features. Even as core fans, they themselves weren't expecting that. Yet, the more they thought about it, the more they felt that it was an ingenious move. If they do go down this route, it would completely cement Overclock as a full-on villain, just like the comics. There won't be any justifications for his actions anymore. Derek felt a tingle in his spine as he watched on with intrigue. The idea of trying to make villains relatable was something everyone was really getting tired of in Hollywood movies for a while now, so seeing this came as a breath of fresh air to most fans. As the next few scenes played, though, with Malachi explaining to Nathan what exactly was going on, whilst indirectly answering his questions about how he got his powers, Linda nodded in realization. That explains him losing his arm. Also explains how Nathan got his powers. But is Malachi just a proxy for Overclock then? The lady then asked herself. She had unfortunately been tricked, much like all of the general audience who weren't core fans of the comics and games, that maybe the live-action version of Malachi wasn't as bad as he seemed to be. Wrong. And the next few scenes proved that as Linda had her thoughts shattered, she, much like everyone, feeling the hairs on her skin rise up as Malachi completely switched demeanors. Prof, I really think I show. Ah, Nathan, you just had to come back, didn't you? I swear this Clint guy's the perfect Professor Overclock. Derek inwardly gulped as he felt the sheer fury and malice reflected in his green irises as the now cyborg-clad man choked Nathan and threw him aside. At this moment, a clear line had been drawn in the audience's mind. If Malachi was willing to manipulate and hurt his student ET colleague's son whom was trying to reason with him, just to get what he wanted, then he really needed to be stopped. From there, the scenes kept escalating, and before the audience knew it, they were in the last half of the movie. The matriculation ceremony scene. Who are you? Call me Overclock. Now, ready for your final act? But with the familiar orchestral piece kicking in once more, every bit as inspiring as ever, The audience in the room practically felt liberated. As Tech Wiz saved Eccleston with his gadget and streaked up the building to sock Overclock a grav-infused uppercut. Then their frenetic, action-packed fight scene followed, with everyone practically on the edge of their seats. Man, the CGI's darn near perfect. Derek felt himself getting more and more into the scene as it continued. However, when Tech Wiz started losing, Linda, alongside many others in the cinema, despite knowing fully well that it was a superhero movie they were watching, couldn't help but clench their fists. It was clear that they too, just like the pedestrians on the street in the movie, were rooting for Nathan to come out on top. However, watching as he was mercilessly beaten down again, with Overclock now holding his defeated figure by the throat, so many in the auditorium whom were unconscious about the deflated gazes on their features, listened as Malachi spoke. "I tried to warn you, Nathan, but you wouldn't listen." And then the hairs on practically everyone's skin rose up in anticipation as they watched Nathan slowly raise his vindictive gaze upwards, his eyes burning with relentless fury. "You knew." Such a disappointment. The brutalizing crunch of Malachi's cyborg helmet that followed, courtesy of Nathan's electro-infused punch, instantly had a pained fan in the auditorium audibly comment, "Get him, Nathan." And much like him, others in the cinema's auditorium, although they weren't saying it, felt the exact same. Linda and Derek weren't exempt either. So, with all their emotions of resentment fed, much like Nathan, whom was currently bodying Malachi on screen, especially with every blessed punch resounding through the auditorium's surround sound system, everyone watched him direct a frustrated, guttural roar at himself as he held back from finishing off the man. Then, they all listened as he spoke, every range of complex emotions palpable in his voice. "I tried to talk. I want you to remember that. I tried to reach out. I tried to understand. And I think you understood. You just didn't care." Hearing that part as Nathan roared in fury, Derek could feel strongly just how badly his favorite hero had wanted to help Malachi from the way his face contorted in a mix of rage, pain, hurt, and disappointment. As a result, he couldn't help but genuinely feel like Kyle had done a phenomenal job of bringing Nathan North to life. But the scene wasn't over yet, so he watched on intently, wanting to actually listen to the rest of the words Nathan had to say. Especially since this scene too, much like the past ones, wasn't even in the comics. "You were a monster, and that was the role you were so determined to play. So I had to play mine. The man who stops the monster." Hearing that part, Linda, much like everyone else in the room, be they fan of the comics or not, experienced the moment that truly elevated whom Nathan North was in their minds. Malachi had used, manipulated, and practically tried to kill him a couple times, and yet, he still chose the hard path of doing the right thing. If that wasn't the true mark of a hero, then they didn't know what was. He's such a well-written protagonist, Linda thought to herself as she watched him leave the aftermath of his fierce battle against the villain as distant police sirens blared. With that, the next few scenes were shown. Malachi was imprisoned in a secure facility. Nathan, using a cloaking tech on his face to mask his injuries, was shown meeting with his worried Gramps later in the day at the house. Apologizing to George, he lied that he'd actually overslept is why he missed out on the matriculation and his calls. And then the next day, the young man rushed to college, having actually overslept this time. However, just before he arrived at the gates, he ran into a tardy Felicia who casually waved over with a smile, only for the duo to have their attention grasped by the blazing speed of police car in a fierce chase with a couple armed robbers. A glint of purpose surfacing in his eyes, Nathan had almost wanted to bolt when Felicia suddenly threw a thin metal plate in his direction. Catching it effortlessly, the young man's eyes widened in realization. It was the now repurposed mini-vacuum slate he had thrown to cushion Eccleston's doomy fall. He'd been unable to retrieve it due to his fierce fight with Overclock, but seeing as Felicia grinned knowingly. After having pieced it all together, she stated, "You can borrow my notes when you're back." Donning a light smile of his own, Nathan replied appreciatively, "Thanks. I will." A familiar inspiring tune cued, already pulsating rapidly. With that, he bolted the opposite direction as he soon found a secluded alleyway, and in a few seconds, was vaulting up its perron as his exosuit slowly took form. And by the time he was fully suited, he launched himself off the building's ledge like a soaring phoenix. The orchestral heroic piece soared in sync, accentuating Tech Wiz's heroic, mid-air pose. And at that exact moment, the movie ended, the credits rolling as everyone in the cinema's auditorium instantly began to give a round of applause and whistles, Derek and Linda vigorously doing the same. Yet, a couple minutes later after the credits had rolled, most were awaiting a post-credit scene like most superhero movies had these days. But even both fans and general audience alike could not have expected it to be so cryptically mind-bending. As footsteps echoed in the mysterious chamber, a masked figure in the dimly lit room approached the cryo-chamber that housed the fragile life that was Caitlin North, encased within. And upon unveiling the mask, back still turned, the figure suddenly turned around to face the camera with a determined gaze. It was none other than Caitlin North herself. "My goodness," Derek audibly commented the moment he was out of the theaters with his girl, a bamboozled expression very much painting his features as he tried to wrap his head around the post-credits scene. Explore more at NovelFire.cm. If even you are stumped, I don't want to get started on what I'm feeling right now. Linda, who had her hands interlocked with his, stated with a similarly puzzled gaze. A plethora of other individuals whom had watched Tech Wiz Year One had the exact same expression of bewilderment on their features. Yet, at the same time, they couldn't help but feel like the movie was worth every dollar they had paid for it, enough for them to want to go for another seating. Meanwhile, as the couple walked up to Leo and Kim, whom were already out the theaters earlier than they were, Daniel and Mary Jane already arguing over something in the corner, the bulky linebacker simply ignored their shenanigans and asked the duo instead, "So how was it?" "It just kept going and going till the end," Derek replied contentedly, to which Linda chimed in with an even more ecstatic smile. "Couldn't have said it better myself." "Yours?" Linda curiously inquired of the couple. "Opposite of yours, I'd say. It was good in the first half. Really good. Then it just kinda took a nosedive to a crawl midway till the credits rolled." Leo sighed, in response to which Kim did the same as she stated, "Maybe we should have watched the superhero movie after all." "Oh, so now you're interested." Leo pinched his girl's cheeks once more. Chapter 253, A-Listers. In its opening week, Fables and Legends amassed $50 million domestically and roughly $95 million internationally, accumulating to a $145 million net profit in total. That was a crap ton of money for a movie's opening week. Contrary to expectations, despite being the unfortunate collateral victim of what was probably the biggest scandal of the year leading up to its release, the dark fantasy epic of Martineau, Ronan's work, at least to the general audience, was building up to be a box office success. However, as Atlas's executives received the report of the net profit, most soon felt themselves breaking out in a cold sweat. They figured it was coming. Yet, this can't be right? One of them, dressed from head to toe in sleek black suit, scratched the back of his head with a dangerous chuckle. "At this rate, we might end up only making double the investment." Another executive massaged his temple with a mix of trepidation and slight panic in his gaze as he reread the report. As if in tandem, everyone else in the meeting room proceeded to also make their own remarks, each one increasingly direr than the last. The general audience wasn't aware, especially since they had kept the information on a tight leash, but the budget that went into making the live-action epic alone was roughly $450 million plus. This figure didn't even account for the marketing budget, which exceeded $70 million plus, nor the numerous additional costs, including administrative and travel expenses incurred during filming, as well as legal fees for copyright clearances and contract negotiations. After all, given the film's large-scale production, coordinating countless moving parts had been essential to bringing its ambitious vision to life. All in all, the actual estimated amount Atlas had spent on Fables and Legends was a couple $1 million over $600 million, hence why the executives were literally panicking. This was why, even if they made double their invested funds, they couldn't consider the venture a success, as by the time their investments were being returned, it wouldn't even have been worth the 1-year-plus wait. At the end of the day, everyone in the meeting room were businessmen to the core. As a result, They more than anyone knew just how well they could have invested that money into something else to make a potentially better net gain during that same span of time, instead of hoping and waiting for triple or quadruple their returns on the movie. In any case, as the executives kept complaining, whining, and moaning, Lex simply kept his expression neutral without saying a thing. After all, he couldn't be blamed for it all, as they had all cumulatively arrived at the decision to milk Fables and Legends by splitting it into 7 parts, coupled with last month's incident that threw a wrench into the movie's hype. However, beneath his seemingly unperturbed FOD was a feeling of utter loss and envying greed as his eyes glazed over another document in his hands, one he had gotten from one of his many webs of vast informants. In it was a detailed report of TechWiz, Year 1's opening week, the superhero movie, earning $90 million domestically and a whopping $135 million internationally. That equated to $230 million. Just a couple $1 million short of the movie's planned budget of $250 million. Considering Kyle and company actually ended up tightly sticking to that budget, they were already on the path to earning double their investments. That said, as the manipulative CEO kept reading through all the info in the document, he soon set it aside in annoyance, a bitter feeling welling up in his heart. Unfortunately for him, though, there was nothing he could do to get back at Kyle to make himself feel better, as obviously, the young man really wasn't the cause of their misfortune. Rather, it was a product of his executives and his own greed especially. Due to this, Lex simply closed his eyes as he let out a light sigh of resignation, acceptance, and defeat. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The earnings of the second week for the fantasy epic and the superhero movie ended up widening the gap even further between the two movies. Fables and Legends racked in a now cumulative $305 million, whereas TechWiz, Year 1, casually hit the $500 million mark with a cumulative net gain of $505 million. Granted, New Year's was coming, and it practically meant that earnings would see a sharp decline due to adults and children alike resuming work and school respectively in the month of January. The production's marketing team of skilled analysts already projected the movie to crack $1 billion. And in the next 3 weeks that came after, it in fact did, the cumulative total settling at a maddening $1.05 billion. That was insane for an independently produced superhero movie. So much that the Guinness Book of Records soon made the announcement a few days later. TechWiz, Year 1, was a box office juggernaut. There was no disputing that, especially in comparison with Fables and Legends, current $685 million that had long taken a nosedive, practically after its second week in the cinemas. The reason? Well, it was reflected in people's opinions and thoughts as they practically buzzed about both movies enthusiastically on various social media apps, Tweet Talk especially. In fact, on a viral post from a now popular website account that tallied box office earnings, was a caption post of both movies with pictures of their cumulative box office earnings, so far stating, "Box office juggernauts, underscore, 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 underscore. TechWiz, Year 1, $1,050,769,427. Fables and Legends, $685,205,941. Underscore, 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 underscore. Kratos acts, boy. Check out them statistics. TechWiz, Year 1's absolutely decimating Fables and Legends was Lord, as it should at Kratos acts. Watched the fantasy epic a few days back, and it just shoots itself in the foot. Just when the story was building up to a crescendo. That's where TechWiz, Year 1, has it beat by leaps and bounds. Hobbit and Wi-Fi sucks. Totally agree with comment upstairs. TechWiz, Year 1, slowly eases you into its plot and steadily builds up, only to take you on a wild ride midway till the very end. Heck, even the post-credit scene left us with a shit ton of unending questions. Sharingan shenanigans. You have no idea how much that post-credit scene did me dirty at Hobbit and Wi-Fi sucks. Is Caitlin dead? Is she alive? Was Malachi making a clone of her all along? Did she know about all the events in that went down between Malachi and her son? My questions just keep piling, damn it. I need a TechWiz, Year 2, now. Bangs table. One punch tweet. Oi. Commenter upstairs. Don't be giving me indirect spoilers if you don't want to get catapulted to the moon with a punch. I'm yet to watch the movie. Shiny like Gollum. Fables and Legends would have performed so much better if it wasn't for that stupid-ass padding they added midway to draw out the story with unnecessary scenes that weren't even in the book. Ariana_banana. I know, right at Shiny like Gollum. Even Martin talked about in an interview that he'd told them he didn't like the final cut, but they didn't listen. SpongeBob No Pants. I really don't get what it is with Hollywood movie directors and producers thinking they can do a better job of rewriting the story than the de facto authors. We need to wage war against this. People FR. Expecto Tweetronum. My goodness, $1 billion plus? And that's only for a month and a week. You guys think, TechWiz, Year 1, will crack $1.5 billion before its theatrical 2-month run-ins? Why so serious though at Expecto Tweetronum? It should. It very much should. Enjoy new adventures at Novelfired CM. Meanwhile, as all these was happening, the main cast of the superhero blockbuster had been going around doing promos for the final weeks of the movie's theatrical run. That was why, presently, Kyle, Xavier, Sharon, and Clint found themselves on the late-night Abraham Burton show, all the way in London, England. As the audience laughed once again, Xavier continued to explain to both them and charismatically welcoming host whom was finding the interactions between the cast genuinely entertaining. So, we'd lost the opportunity to make Stray Wolves, and we're getting ready to go on our beach date. Damage control beach date. Kyle, dressed in a 3-piece navy blue suit, casually tossed in with a gestured hand, his legs crossed, and his smile mischievous. Abraham sputtered on his wine and went into a fit of laughing coughs as Sharon, dressed in a sexy red formal evening gown, went over to pat his back while similarly laughing alongside Clint and the audience. I'll have you all know, Cass threw a beach ball at this menace for insinuating the exact same thing that day. Zay, fitted in a well-tailored 3-piece brown suit, deadpanned in response as he gestured to the audience and Abraham himself. Another wave of laughter filled the room as the young star simply shrugged, the glints of playful mischief never leaving his sapphire irises. Anyway, Kyle arrives with his agent and assistant, right as we exited the doors and voila, here we are. The director concluded with a humorous tone and the audience whistled and cheered in response. As Sharon went back to take her seat, the charismatic host now in a much better state, he soon asked the lady herself in his British accent. We've heard that the meme that popped up during the film's production was all you're doing. Any truth to that? I take pride in admitting that it was. Sharon gave a smug expression, earning chuckles from both Abraham, her fellow stars, and the audience. In fact, the lady retrieved her phone from the glass table as she continued speaking. I have a full clip of the entire thing. She showed Abraham the video, to which the host quickly yet politely gestured to the massive LED TV behind them, one that Sharon promptly shared the video to a few seconds after. Kyle, guys, can someone please let me down? Sharon, on birthdays, we bash piatas. And right now, you look like a pretty bashable one. Kyle, don't make me come down there, young lady. Sharon, is that so? As the stars themselves watched the short clip alongside Abraham and the audience in the room, they all couldn't help but burst into another wave of hearty laughter as the lady pulled the lever to raise the young man even higher. A few seconds later, the laughter had died down considerably, with Abraham gesturing to Clint this time in curiosity. Clint, your portrayal of Malachi was absolutely brilliant. How does it feel to have shot to fame almost overnight? Overwhelming. The middle-aged actor purposely let out a shaky breath of nervous awe. The audience chuckled at that, as all eyes in the room fell on him. But hearing my daughter telling kids her age she'll call overclock on them if they ever bully her has been quite the experience, I must add. He played up the comedic timing so perfectly, everyone went into another fit of laughter. And just like that, the talk show went on. On the eve of it ending, though, Abraham asked one last question, his choice of tone clearly interested as he directed it solely towards Kyle and Sharon. So, how does it feel to finally be A-listers? Sharon was the first to answer. I've been chasing it for so long. It feels like all the sacrifices I had to go through to get here has finally paid off. In other terms, you could say I'm extremely happy. The lady concluded with a ravishing smile reminiscent of a flower in full bloom. To that, Abraham and the audience applauded, and so did her fellow actors in the room. As for Kyle, he shifted slightly in his seat and remained silent for a few moments before finally speaking, his tone carrying a distinct note of genuine appreciation. I feel privileged. I could never have gotten this far on my own, so, more than anything else, I feel privileged. He repeated in conclusion with a sincere smile and an honest gaze in his sapphire irises. Once again, it manifested Kyle's authenticity and humility as a human, first and foremost. People might consider him a star, but the young man himself never really did. After all, at his core, he was just glad to be able to do the things he loved and make a successful career out of it. Every other thing that came out of it to him was purely a bonus. This was something everyone in the room felt, and before they knew it, host, fellow stars, and the audience alike were already showering him with the loudest of applause. And with that, Abraham gave each individual star a hug and then rounded up the show for the night. Chapter 254. What next? 3 weeks later, becoming an A-lister in the industry came with a whole lot of perks. From having significant influence over projects, to high salaries, access to exclusive opportunities, luxurious lifestyle perks like private jets and luxury cars, if said A-lister was so willing, the ability to choose roles that aligned their interests, and a level of fame that could open doors to various industries beyond acting. So much was on the table. However, one thing Sharon could never have expected was how quickly her enemies could change their tunes just to please her and get her on their side. Having cumulatively made a grand total of $1.6 billion in the box office, Tech Wiz, Year 1, had ended its theatrical run in the second week of February. And for the lady who had been paid her 1% cut of the box office earnings, netting her a staggering $16 million, the information soon leaked to the internet a couple days after. That was how, in a twist of genuinely unbelievable incidences, Sharon found Bianca, her former agent, in the doorway of her apartment in Canada. However, without even giving her the opportunity, the lady slammed the door shut in her face. Sure, she knew her former talent agency was in dire need of actors, as most had been jumping ship one after the other after her contract was leaked to the media, but, in her opinion, it could go rot in hell for all she cared. It was the sort of treatment she believed they deserved, and despite several attempts over the next couple of days to get her to have a meeting with her, the newest A-list actress in town didn't budge a single inch. That said, Sharon wasn't the only one having the last laugh. Aside from getting a 5% cut each of the box office along with their initial upfront payment of $2.5 million each, Xavier and Cass were now being contacted once again by Chillflix. Apparently, their plan to split Stray Wolves into 2 parts had backfired so horribly, fans were even more annoyed when they found out that originally, the power couple had been planning to make it a single movie. As a result, with Xavier's acclaim as a fantastic director now back at its initial high after a long lull in the industry, Chillflix had hoped to capitalize on it and Cassandra's impressive work ethic by having them direct and produce the second half of the movie. Not that the fanboy gave a shit about a money-grubbing corp like Chillflix whom would go to such greedy lengths, only to end up butchering a fantastic script that took him months to perfect in hopes of doing justice to Martin's work. And just like the staunch pillar that she was to her husband, Cassandra too didn't budge either despite their many attempts. Both, without mercy, declined in the bluntest ways possible. Chillflix could practically screw off their DMs and go find another director and producer to carry that load. After all, there were no shortage of them in the industry. As for Clint, whom had also gotten an upfront pay of $1.5 million along with a 1% share of the box office returns from his signed contract, well, he was forced to swiftly get an agent as the multitude of offers he was receiving were just beyond him. Thankfully, Oliver had come to his rescue and hooked him up with a free agent like him whom was reputable in the business. Considering the middle-aged man never wanted his new career change to take away his main role as a father and a dad to his only daughter, he was more than willing to settle to be an independent actor, much like Kyle, Lily, and Sharon. Jeff, on the other hand, despite being Kyle's Hollywood gramps, wasn't given any favoritisms in the payment department. In fact, the old man himself had been the one to tell Kyle during their negotiations for his role as Grandpa George that he'd only wanted the upfront pay, albeit his had been at a high $10 million due to his immensely high status in Hollywood. Lily, too, had received a high upfront pay of $5 million for the movie but was planned to receive a 1% percentage cut of the box office returns in the second movie since she would be playing a very crucial role as Nathan's mom. Still, Kyle had felt it imperative upon him to dish them a couple bonuses due to the movie's immense success. Now, Dot Productions, however, they were probably one of the highest gainer in all these. Considering they had only majorly been involved the post-production of the movie, with most of the money they had spent still coming from the team's planned budget, they had essentially received a sweet $80 million without any prior investments. And, considering the contract also had them booked for the second and third movie, with an increased box office cut of 10% for both in the contract, they were set to make even more money, albeit they would also be putting in a lot of effort when the time came. Kyle's employees, too, at Spawn Point Studio, especially those whom had cameoed in the movie, alongside his core team, received staggering bonuses of their own, much to their glee and excitement. But the highest paid amongst them all had been Oliver himself, since roughly 80%, about $1.2 billion plus, of the movie's return went back to Kyle as both the biggest investor and the executive producer of the movie. Oliver, whom was his agent, was set to take a 20% cut of it. Simply put, the agent had made an insane $256 million, one that even he himself, despite how rich he already was due to several real estate investments he had here and there, was still floored by. In any case, everyone was happy, well accounted and sorted for, without any form of bias. And that was also how Kyle Kestis, even after paying everyone their dues, soon found himself receiving an interview request from one of the most popular magazines in the entire world. Forbes. The young star, unwittingly at the age of 24, had made it into the list of youngest billionaires in the world with the given title, Hollywood's youngest self-made billionaire. And as one would expect, it didn't take long for the news to go viral. In response, Kyle once again started trending on all social media platforms, with Tweet Talk being the biggest hotspot for it, with the tag hashtag #KyleTheBillionaire trending at #1 on the platform. That said, with that sort of title now attributed to his name, simply calling Kyle a star was almost as if one was doing his achievements a disservice. Rather, people had now collectively began regarding him as superstar. And obviously, the proudest and most excited of the bunch were Kyle's core fans, all of whom enthusiastically took to their fan group to express their many thoughts. Princess Peach, it's so amazing, isn't it? Seeing our cinnamon roll go from the indie breakout sensation to stardom and then finally, superstardom. I might just cry due to how happy I am. I'm so freaking proud of him, guys. So fudgin' amazingly proud to also be a question. We do a bit of trolling. Surreal doesn't even come close to describing how this makes me feel, honestly. Fulfilled is what I'd call it, as practically, I went from being the biggest troll of Kyle's fans to being a self-proclaimed hardcore fanboy who's so immensely proud to be here. If I were to go back in time, I'd definitely do it all over again. Peter_loves_fantasy. I have to admit, we do a bit of trolling. Your lore's gonna be one for the ages and recorded in the history books. And speaking of books, I'm finally writing the last chapters of my novel. Wild to think Kyle's words inspired me to get here. And guess what? It's been such an amazing experience thus far. Mamma mia, I think some of the biggest thanks has to go to you at Princess Peach for bringing us all questions together. This fan club, bar none, has been one of the coolest fan communities I've ever known. Looking forward to spending many more years with you all. Tricks or treat at Mamma Mia, me too. Couldn't have said it better myself. I've never been a fan of most Hollywood stars, or superstars for that matter, but for Kyle, I'd staunchly stand for him. Anywhere. Kyle's girlfriend. I'm not going to give up on my future. Husband, guys. I'm going to wait till he notices me. Waifu with a rocket launcher. Haha. In your dreams, woman. In your dreams. And no, I'm not nuking you either today. I'm happy enough as is with Kyle's success. I'd rather rain confetti above everyone instead of rockets. Shrek loves Fiona. If I were to meet Kyle right now, I'd probably ask him, so what next? I have a feeling he'd probably give that signature charming smile of his and simply shrug with a reserved demeanor while responding that he'd go with wherever the flow takes him. Discover stories at Free Novel Fire. The Imposter. He probably would at Shrek Loves Fiona. Probably. As Oliver sent that particular text, he simply tucked his phone into his pockets with a proud smile and then ignited his Porsche's engine, driving the sleek car out of his garage. Considering there were a couple of backlog tasks that he needed to sort out, especially pertaining to Kyle's Forbes interview and the celebration party in the coming days, he was headed over to the respective locations to supervise if it was coming along smoothly. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. A few days later. I guess at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is a single question. Is this what you're willing to do? Passion can be a gift, you know, but it can also be a curse. Not everyone goes far in life, even if they're passionate about something. And certainly not everyone gets good at the things they're passionate about or makes a comfortable living out of it. It's why, despite knowing that I work really hard for the things I want, I also believe, to a certain extent, that I've been very lucky, very blessed. But then again, when you're young, you're allowed to stumble, fall, fail, get back up, try again, make some more mistakes, rinse and repeat. It's never easy, but I'll advise that you need to understand and most especially, learn how to go through that process. Ride that wave past the worst to get to the best. Because, truthfully, when you're young, you can recover quickly when you mess up or get hurt. But as you grow older, it becomes harder to do so. The more responsibilities you have, the lesser the repetition of that cycle you're allowed to go through. Still, it's just that. Harder. Not impossible. Nothing's impossible. I hope you know that. With a sincerely genuine smile nestling on his lips, one that was evidently reflected in his warm sapphire irises, Kyle stood up from the plush couch and walked out of the camera's frame. And cut. That's a wrap, the director declared, and instantly, everyone in the office applauded as Kyle gave them all a light bow. Having become widespread news that the young man was a billionaire at such a young age, the popular American magazine had requested to also have a 2-minute video of him made, simply talking about how he got there and what he felt made a successful young entrepreneur in Hollywood. And so, exchanging handshakes with each involved individual in the rearranged office for the video, save for Oliver and the rest of his team whom had been on the side watching it all play out, the Forbes team soon left their office. No sooner had that happened, Owen was the first to speak, his tone brimming with enthusiasm. And with that, Kyle's schedule's clear for the day. Finally, celebration party. Here we freaking come. Woo! To that, everyone in the office shared a hearty laughter as they shook their heads in amusement at Owen's shenanigans, Jenny going as far as giving him a light, harmless jab. However, they also felt his enthusiasm was justified. With the immense success of Tech Whiz Year 1, a large-scale celebration party, one that ran from evening till nightfall had been planned, complete with a plethora of things to do. All right then, let's head over. Kyle, with a light smile on his lips, moved towards the door, everyone else trailing behind him. Chapter 255, The End, is just the beginning. Kyle and the gang arrived at the celebration party as the orange evening sun slowly descended below the horizon, the pop music from the hall softly thumping in the background. Alighting from their respective vehicles, the group swiftly flocked in different directions in palpable excitement, save for Oliver and Kyle, who simply shook their heads in amusement as they took their time making their way across the venue. The private venue they had rented had a vast, sprawling, and well-kept lawn, a plethora of high-class vehicles already parked across its expansive grounds. Nearby was a wide, open-air, courtyard patio that gave a fun yet intimate vibe, complete with an outdoor bar and a purposely barricaded space with small garden hedges for large-format games. This was where Kyle and his agent had run into Tiana, Jasmine, Sharon, and Lily, all of whom were engrossed in what seemed to be a noticeably engaging conversation. Around them, too, were a couple other actors, actresses, models, and fellow industry peers, all of them engaged in intimate conversations of their own. "Hey guys, isn't it a tad bit too cold for you all to be out here?" the young billionaire inquired, a slight hint of concern in his tone. Slightly startled by his arrival, a noticeably glad expression on their features, all three actresses jointly responded as they turned around to face Kyle. "Nope, Sapphire/not at all. Dreamboat/nah. We're just dandy." Tiana, on the other hand, her expression brightening the moment she saw Oliver, who walked over to give her a kiss, soon clarified what they had actually been up to. "There's this new script for an original fantasy series Dreamland's been working on. It's called The Promised Night. I'm trying to hook all three of them to star in it." "Well, did they take the bait?" Kyle humored the infamous director who chuckled warmly as she played along. As a matter of fact, yes, I'd say I'm quite the skilled angler. In fact, I was also planning to have you star in it as one of the important supporting characters, a knight by the name of Julian. Oh, Kyle let out a genuinely surprised expression, his gaze curious. Interested, Tiana asked of him, to which the young superstar smiled appreciatively. Sure. All right then. I'll forward the script to you through Oliver in a few days. The director beamed, to which she then angled her gaze over to her man. But for now, dear, I'd like for you to tell me all about your day. Tiana gently pulled the agent aside with a seductive flutter of her eyes, both sectioning themselves away from the group. Watching the sight before them in amused curiosity, the trio of actresses giggled mirthfully, while Kyle let out a light chuckle as they went on to discuss other topics of their own a few seconds later. Moments later, Kyle had moved away from the ladies, his steps casual and light as he made his way to the hall. Feeling his smartphone vibrating in his pocket, the young man retrieved the device, only to let out another amused chuckle at the picture Eliza had sent him via his messenger app. In it, Clint, whom had decided to miss out on today's party as he'd planned to take his daughter to an amusement park, looked noticeably pale beyond measure on the roller coaster ride, while the young girl herself seemed to be having the time of her life. Having texted in response, Kyle, whom had arrived before the hall's doors, tucked his phone into his pocket and walked in with a jovial smile. The hall itself had a full-service bar, one where crystal chandeliers shimmered from above as expert mixologists stood at the ready in the corner whilst crafting cocktails with their professional skills in response to the plethora of orders. There was also a warm lighting that casted a golden glow over the sleek marble floors and lavish velvet furnishings as a DJ spun smooth beats from an elevated podium. Scattered throughout were also seating areas with plush sofas, polished mahogany tables, and glass tables that provided the perfect spots for mingling between industry peers. In any case, no sooner had Kyle stepped into the building, a plethora of celebrities swarmed him, especially those of the female variety, most seemingly excited to make connections. But then again, Kyle wasn't stupid enough to believe that most of them were in fact solely interested in making connections. That was why, for those whom he figured simply wanted to make connections with him, he respectfully gave them the audience they wanted. As for the latter with other intentions, well, he was already a taken man, and like the loyal boyfriend that he was, he politely excused himself from the vying swarms of female celebrities and models with a couple choice words. Unfortunately, I need to meet with a couple other people tonight who require my presence. Hopefully, we'll run into each other again soon enough. With a charming smile that had them stunned for a couple seconds, Kyle vanished into the sea of celebrities present in the hall, much to the dismay of the homewreckers. Spotting Jeff, Mark, Hank, and Bruce sitting in a secluded south corner of the hall as a couple servers placed glasses of wines, cocktails, and trays of canapes before them, Kyle walked over, his smile delightful. You guys having fun yet? There's drinks, there's snacks, there's music, there's money. Thanks to you. What more could we ask for, kid? Jeff reclined into his sofa like a retired old veteran, a toothy grin plastered on his features. In response, he alongside the remaining trio shared a warm, hearty laughter. Immediately after, though, Mark then spoke. So Kyle, the script for Epic 2's finally completed. Seriously, that's great. Kyle's enthusiasm reflected just how happy he was to hear that. Yeah, Mark really put his A game into the script, I'll tell you. It's bar none brilliant. Bruce chimed in with gestured hands in the air like he was highlighting something spectacular. Pre-production begins later this year, but, as the deuteragonist of what we feel will go on to be a franchise, Mark figured we should at least let you know. Hank also gave his input as he tossed a canap into his mouth. And don't worry, I already ran into your assistant, who might I add, is quite the party monster, and informed him that we'd mail the script to your office tomorrow. Mark gestured in conclusion. Well then, I guess I'll be looking forward to whenever filming begins in the coming months. Kyle gave an ecstatic grin, his spine tingling in excitement. Cheers. Jeff suddenly raised his glass cup to everyone around, and, with another hearty chuckle shared between them, they all followed through, save for Kyle, who simply cheered along with his words. Like that, the party went on. But, being the ambivert that he was, Kyle, as usual, soon took to looking for a secluded environment to quickly recharge his rapidly dropping social battery. Thankfully, the venue's hall also had just that. A quiet, nice rooftop terrace with a couple elegantly designed patio chairs and tables that offered a stunning skyline view of downtown Toronto. Finding his way there, Kyle soon widened his eyes in surprise when he met an expected party with an unexpected party. Xavier, Cass, John, Barry, he exclaimed as he moved towards all four, who similarly brightened up the moment they saw him. Speak of the devil. Xavier was the first to respond as Barry remarked excitedly. We were just talking about you. Now, that's what I call perfect timing. Cass, on the other hand, took a light sip of her wine as John smiled, his sagely voice marked with a palpable hint of enthusiasm as he spoke. Say, Kyle, what do you say to reprising your role as the chaotic 10th for a couple special episodes celebrating Dreamlanding's 50th anniversary? The Dreamland executive casually dropped the bomb, to which Kyle, after freezing for a hot second, gave a vigorous nod of eager excitement. Of course, I'd love to. Turning the door handle, Kyle stepped into his apartment, his mood practically through the roof. Sweetie, I'm home, he called out in a melodious tone as he took off his shoes and placed them on the side. Walking into the living room, he met his girlfriend clad in a long, lace-white night dress, her knees pulled up to her chin and a notebook alongside a pen in her hands as she gave him a surprised expression. Then she signed. You're back early. Yeah, didn't want to leave you all by your lonesome. Kyle leaned on the wall, legs crossed as he stared at the lady with a loving gaze, to which he then signed. How's the anthology coming along? I'm having a nasty case of writer's block. Christina pouted with a sulky face, to which Kyle chuckled as he inwardly thought to himself. So cute. But honey, you didn't have to rush home for me. You could have stayed at the party longer. The lady, whose hair was let down in soft curls, signed once more, her expression slightly concerned as she added, Are you sure you didn't miss the opportunity to make solid or necessary connections with a couple interesting people? With a long, affectionate stare into her evergreen irises, almost as if she was his muse, Kyle slowly moved towards the lady instead, and, raising her up from the sofa gently, his movements gentle yet meticulous, the young man placed her arms around his neck and his on her waist as he whispered softly, I'm going to serenade you indoors. Although Christina had already been finding herself blushing slightly at Kyle's actions, it wasn't until he had said those words that the lady had a full-on, rosy shade of red form on her cheeks. And as Kyle led her in a gentle waltz, complete with slight sways to a tune and a melody only he could hear, he soon opened his mouth as he stared at the woman before him with loving adoration. His voice was sweet, it was romantic, and most of all, it was filled with the warmth and passion of a man who truly loved his woman. Why would I want to stay? Now that you're here, speaking through your eyes, smiling as we waltz. Oh, it's not enough. All of the time we spent, veiling ourselves, slowly falling in, sinking ever deep. That must have been love. With ever-growing emotions of pure, heartfelt love overflowing in her heart, Christina listened as Kyle sang the single pre-chorus that was dedicated solely to her, his voice tender and soft. And it feels like home. Happy tears of love brimming on her eyelids. One that Kyle gently wiped with a gentle caress of his thumb. The young man sang the chorus to his muse. Darling, if you don't mind, I'll take your hand tonight. We could just dance the night. Let me adore you. And as I take you in, gazing into those evergreen eyes, I see our future together. Crystal, bright and clear. And with a light hum of the melodic tune in his head, Kyle kept leading his lady in a gentle waltz. A few minutes later, both individuals leaned in closer, standing atop her toes. Despite how far in Kyle had leaned in, Christina soon locked lips with her man, both sharing a sweet kiss. Having planned to abstain from the more intimate things and not go farther until they were ready for marriage, this alone to them was more than enough. After all, in love, no matter how one spun it, it was the little things that mattered the most. Kyle found himself in a lush, almost ethereal-looking garden. The ambience it created was soothing. It was peaceful. It was comforting. But most of all, for some unknown reason or the other, it felt extremely familiar. And soon enough, the young man found out just why. Seated practically a few inches away from him were very familiar faces. Familiar aged and wrinkled faces he never thought he would ever see again. He should have cried. He definitely should have cried happy tears. Yet, instead, he simply gave them the brightest of warm, heartfelt smiles. See, we told you. You were meant for great things. Ollie, Mary, Joel, Rebecca, and Paul, in their signature unified voice, gave their adopted son a similar smile. You did, Kyle responded, his voice cracking a bit. Then his vision blurred, tears dripping down his eyelids as he repeated, his words coming out in choking, indebted sobs of never-ending gratitude. You very much did. Be good, okay? Their unified voices, once again, spoke, this time with an ethereally divine feel. I will. Kyle gave a thankful nod, his blooming smile returning as he promised further. I definitely will. Continue reading at Free Novel Fire. Blinking open his eyes, his vision bleary as he stared at the ornately designed ceiling of his apartment for a couple seconds. The corners of Kyle's lips soon lifted into a smile of fulfillment. The dream he had experienced. He could tell. It wasn't a dream. It happened, truly. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But he was glad it did. And to him, that was all that truly mattered. Glancing over to his right, Christina snuggled up to him like a contented feline as she peacefully slept. The young man gently stroked her blonde hair. A few minutes later, however, he was off the bed, gently maneuvering his way around her in an effort not to shake her awake. Having successfully done so, the young man then went on to observe his personal hygiene whilst making 2 cups of coffee. All dressed a couple minutes later, not particularly surprised that Christina still hadn't woken up even though he was being extremely quiet. Kyle went over to her, placed a kiss on her forehead, and whispered, I'll see you later, dear. His woman, as Kyle had found out these past few months of living together, was a pretty deep sleeper. And so, with a gentle click of the door, Kyle headed out to his office for the day. Yet, resting on the kitchen slab, was her lidded mug of coffee with the note, Just how you like it, dear. Hope the anthology goes well. Rooting for you. Stepping into his office for the day, his team already on ground, Kyle gave his greetings to which they all promptly responded. Morning, boss. Owen saluted. Morning, Kyle. Gwen, Jenny, and Camille chimed. Morning, Kyle. Stuart and Miguel smiled in response. As for Oliver, whom was taking a sip of his coffee, he simply gestured to the table as he replied. Good morning, Kyle. Staring at the script for what he deduced was epic too, Kyle let out a contented sigh as his trusty agent stated. Looks like it's going to be another busy year. It sure does. Kyle gave a light smile in response as he casually, yet purposefully walked over to the table. And as he did, the door behind him, like the back cover to the last pages of a book, gently closed with a satisfying click.